These 50 questions can help you in preparing for your PMP Agile bite of preparation. We have been observing that people facing difficulty in understanding Agile and putting the Agile in the overall context of PMP. So enjoy these 50 questions and please don't forget to subscribe to our channel because we keep uploading such kind of interesting content pretty frequently.
Question 1.
Which of the following best defines the product backlog? Option A, product backlog is a collection of user stories. Option B, product backlog contains the project scope. Product backlog is a baseline requirement document, option C. And the final option D, product backlog contains prioritized requirements. You can pause the video, think about it, and answer your choice or pick your choice. Okay, so if I have to pick a choice, I will pick option D. Let me explain why. Now, product backlog is a collection of user story. This option may look very attractive because you think of, yes, Agile, there is something called product backlog in Agile. And user stories is something which is common keyword in Agile, and you may want to pick that. But that's a trap. The product backlog definitely contains user story, but it can contain other things as well. So if I don't get any better option, I may pick up because user story is also a type of requirement, but I look for other options as well because product backlog contains requirement and the well-refined requirements which are prioritized are called user story. So I go for the next option. Yeah. So A is a candidate. You can say it's a candidate option which we can consider when we are going forward. So I can say, okay, I am marking it probably a consideration. So I mark a question mark here. Product backlog contains the project scope. Definitely it does not. Yeah. So the idea of a product backlog, it contains the requirement, not the scope. So the scope is a solution part of the product where we are thinking of how are we going to meet the requirement. Remember the difference between scope and requirement. So product backlog is definitely not about the scope. Product backlog is a baseline requirement document. The word baseline makes this option false because we are using product backlog as an artifact in Agile World. And in Agile World, the requirements are emerging. So product backlog is a living requirement document rather than a baseline requirement document. If I just change the word from baseline to living requirement document, the option C becomes the right option as well. But the word baseline is making it wrong. The final option D, product backlog contains prioritized requirement. Yeah. Now let's compare the option D and option A. Yeah. Now one of the assumption many of you who are learning Agile make is that there has to be a user story in the product backlog. But in the Agile world, user story is one of the tool of exploring requirements incrementally. You can use other tools as well. So it's not like must to use user story. What is needed is incremental exploration of requirement so that you are continuously discovering new requirement and you are meeting it. And the product backlog should contain all those discovered requirements in a prioritized mode. So the option D is the more appropriate one out of the available 4 option or more than the option A. So I will choose option D as a product backlog contains prioritized requirement.
Question 2.
While demonstrating the product increment in the iteration review meeting, the team discovered new acceptance criteria for the done user story. So what is the best thing to do next? Let's look at the option. Option A, mark the user story undone and move to the next iteration. Okay. Option B, create a new product backlog item with the incremental requirement. Okay. Perform a root cause analysis on the missing acceptance criteria. Okay. Ask the stakeholders about the next step. So I pause. You can pick up your option. You can pause the video as well and then pick up your option. Now, before I choose my option, I think let's discuss this question, probably the scenario as well as the option. And we also learn along with just doing these multiple choice questions. So the situation is here where your team is demonstrating something in the iteration review meeting, and there were few user stories or the product backlog items which got completed during the iteration. But now you have many stakeholders who are participating in iteration review meeting, and some of the stakeholder or one of the stakeholder may find a particular thing is not yet at a level where they expected it to be, and they wanted to add incremental thing to it. You can call it incremental requirement, or they may want to add an incremental acceptance criteria that, okay, this thing should have this as well. Yeah, so that is something they are asking. Now, what do? We are already done with that iteration and we are in this situation. The option A is saying mark the user story undone and move it to the next iteration. So which means that I completed the user story without this particular additional requirement into it. Now I should mark the whole story undone and move it to the next iteration. Now, in general, there are two problems in these options. First is that user story which was discussed, explored during the iteration, if it meets definition of done, it's done. Yeah. The requirement which is getting discussed is just getting discovered. So there is no need, or if we keep opening those user stories just based on the feedback, then we may never finish. We may never move forward. So it is not recommended to open that particular item. Rather, it is recommended to create a new item. Yeah, that's the option B is which is talking about. So rather than opening the whole user story and saying it is not done, we better add the incremental work into a separate product backlog item, maybe a new user story, and we should move that story into the product backlog. That's the first section. Part of A has a problem. The second part of A, move to the next iteration. This is also has a issue here. If something new is getting discovered, by default, it may not move to the next iteration directly. It goes into the product backlog, and based on other priorities, it might go into the next iteration. It might get into after 3 iterations, it may never get done. It depends upon other priorities as well. You just received a feedback. You not necessarily do it in the next iteration itself. Here we are assuming this is the most high priority thing we have to work on. Since the question is not giving anything about the priority, we have no reason to move it into a next iteration. We will review and decide where we should move it in the subsequent iteration. So that's why the option A goes out. Now, option B is a good option. Yeah, create a product backlog item with incremental requirement, or I would say that the gap between the current user story and the future requirement you have, you should create that small product backlog item, and you need to add it into a product backlog. Yeah. Now, this statement is not saying what to do with that product backlog. So this statement looks okay to me, and we consider it as a candidate option for marking for the right option. Let's see the option C. Perform a root cause analysis on missing acceptance criteria. So this is talking about how can you miss a particular acceptance criteria? What should you do next in order to improve that you don't miss such kind of acceptance criteria? Yeah, that seems to be okay. Yeah, but may not necessarily be the just next step. See, we are working in the agile way of working. We expect these kind of requirements to get discovered. But if you have a trend of such kind of things happening in the iteration review, then definitely it triggers that we should do something about this kind of gap, so that we can refine the product backlog item ahead in time or before we really work on them. So it's a good thing to do, but not necessarily a next thing to do. So if I have to choose between B and C, I may do B first. And then if I have a trend of such kind of things happening, I may discuss the particular trend in a retrospective meeting later on, but B seems to be the better option out of like if I compare with C. Then let's go to D, ask stakeholder about the next step. So it's like, yeah, we are in a situation, and as a project team, we are standing and asking stakeholders, tell us what to do. That seems to be a little too much. You as a team, you as a project manager, project team should be telling and guiding the stakeholder to follow a process and structure, which helps them in getting things done. If something like this is happening, you and your team should be the one who tells how this will get taken care, rather than you are asking the stakeholder to tell you what they feel is the right thing to do after discovering this particular change. Definitely, when you are prioritizing the product backlog after adding into a product backlog this particular incremental requirement, you do discuss with the stakeholders. But it's not necessary to talk to the stakeholder and asking about next step right now in the iteration review meeting itself. You just need to add this item into the product backlog with the incremental requirement. So looking at this, the option B seems to be the most appropriate option in this particular situation.
Question 3.
You are briefing about the agile approach your project is following in the project kickoff meeting. The marketing business head asked how the project will validate scope. Which of the following is true about validating scope in agile? Okay, option A, the agile way of working does not require validating scope. Option B, in agile, team does the scope validation. Okay. C, agile teams use retrospective meeting for validating scope. Option D, agile team use iteration review meeting for validating scope. Pick your choice. You can pause the video. Then I talk about my opinion about this question. Okay, so rather than looking at the option, I directly want to talk about the situation. So you are briefing about the project and the approach your team is going to take, and someone is asking, how are you going to do a validate scope? So situation is like this: someone coming from traditional project management background as a stakeholder, asking you a question in their terminology and expecting you to explain how this thing is getting done in agile way of working. So that's the kind of question this particular question is, what kind of a situation this particular question is putting in front of us. So where do we do validate scope process or a scope validation in case of agile ways of working? So we should be very clear about the difference between verification and validation. Verification is something which can be done by the team. So option B is good if we talk about scope verification. May not hold good when we are talking about scope validation. So the difference here is the team is expected to ensure everything is working as per specification, as per understanding, but is it really meeting the requirement? That is something the business, the end users representative can only do that. So in the Scrum way of working, maybe stakeholder or a product owner are expected to look at the product and see, is it meeting what really intended? Are we really meeting the requirement? That's the whole idea about validation. So the option B is not holding true, and not doing that validation is also not a right thing to do. So option A is also not holding true. You may use different word. Yeah, in agile word, you may use different word, but you do a validation of what you are making against the requirement. Yeah. So the solution validation has to happen. Yeah, you may use some different terminology. So option A is also out. Option B is also out. Now look at option C and D. Now, retrospective meeting is more like audit, reflection, continuous improvement meeting. Yeah, it's not a meeting where you are interacting with stakeholders, business representative, and taking the acceptance or feedback on something which you have made. Yeah. So the idea of validation is you take your product to the business or the end users and take their feedbacks or acceptance on it. Now you can do it incrementally. You not necessarily have to wait for iteration review meeting. At the same time, iteration review meeting also serves that purpose. So out of the available option, we can pick the option D, because in iteration review, you are taking the product to the business stakeholders, demonstrating it, learning about their attitude, their feedback about that particular development. If they like it, they may acknowledge some part of it and accept it for their uses. If they have some feedback, they provide you as an input, which you consider, you add those inputs in your product backlog, you refine them, and as per prioritization, you do it at a later stage. So out of available option, in this particular case, we can pick option D. And I can say relatively, in this particular case, option D is the one which is clearly coming out, because other options are targeting something else rather than validating scope in the agile context.
Question 4.
Your project uses an approach where the project deliverables develop incrementally throughout 2-week iterations. Which of the following can assist in evaluating the readiness of each deliverable? Acceptance criteria, definition of ready, iteration review, the final option, definition of done. You can pause and think about these 4 options and the question before I share my idea. Okay, so what I read in this question is, rather than saying that we are using Agile approach, the question is giving you a description of an Agile approach. So you are working in 2 weeks long iterations and you are expected to finish the work at the end of 2 weeks. And the question is primarily focusing on deliverables. So how do you know the deliverables are complete? Now, rather than using the word complete, the question is using the word readiness of the deliverable, but it can be interpreted as completeness of the deliverable. Now let's look at the option one by one. Acceptance criteria. So in order to make the deliverable complete during the iteration or at the end of an iteration, one is expected to meet the acceptance criteria. So this is a good option that yes, each deliverable should be meeting, or each product backlog item which is getting completed should be meeting the acceptance criteria for a given item. So that's a good option. Definition of ready. Now, the definition of ready is less to deal with readiness of deliverable. It has more to do with readiness of a product backlog item in order to plan in a given iteration. So it's more like an input thing, not a completion or a finishing thing. So definition of ready is not the right option. Iteration review. Iteration review is a good option in a way that yes, we do look at the product deliverable at the end of an iteration, and the iteration review ensures that stakeholders are involved and they are looking at, is this deliverable good enough for us? So that's good. Definition of done. Now, the definition of done in a way includes the A at least in a pretty much detail, and it can have some amount of other reviews as well if it is needed. So in my opinion, the option D, the definition of done, is the best option. So the idea here is we should incrementally, so it's not waiting for the end of an iteration. Throughout the iteration, you are finishing the product backlog items, or you can say the deliverable of an increment, or an incrementally developing the deliverable. And if the team is having an agreed definition of done, and they ensure that they are meeting agreed definition of done for each product backlog item, that can help them in accessing that how complete we are. Yeah. So if we have not met definition of done, we are not ready for that particular product backlog item completeness criteria. And if we are done with the definition of done, we are done with the completeness of that particular item. So we should take definition of done in this particular question as an option. So just to point out, in order to avoid confusion, I'm just highlighting this particular option.
Question 5.
In your project, the requirements are emerging incrementally. So you decided to use an agile approach where you don't have the baseline scope. Okay. Which of the following helps you control scope creep and gold plating? Select 2. Definition of ready, definition of done, daily stand-up meetings, continuous stakeholder engagement. You can pause, pick your option. I take a quick pause and then we get started. Okay, so the idea, the way I read this particular question is, it is like mixing of some terminologies like scope creep, gold plating, And if you are new to project management space, even if you understand agile way of working, you may find difficult because these words are coming here. Yeah. So what is happening here? The question is saying that your requirements are incrementally coming, yeah, and you are working in the agile way. So how do you ensure that there is no scope creep gold plating happening in the agile way of incremental requirement working? Because since you don't have agreed upon signed off requirement and scope, there is a risk of things going here and there. So how in agile way we control scope? That's the specific question. Or which of the following tools can help you in controlling scope? Controlling scope means we are doing what we have agreed upon. We are doing as per the priority, and we are following a way or a structure which we have agreed to explore the scope and work upon. We are not bypassing the backlog refinement. We are not bypassing the definition of done. So those kind of thing is getting tested. So let's look into the option. So definition of ready is in a way helpful because it helps us in identifying how much product backlog item should be ready enough before we take the work into the iteration. But it is not specific to the scope. It is a generic definition. It is more about the definition of ready facilitate good sprint planning or iteration planning. That's the objective of it. Definition of done is definitely useful. It at least clearly address the gold plating part of it. So it has a clear understanding what all is included whenever you work on a particular product backlog item, what all you should be working on. So the team cannot do beyond what they are expected to do as per definition of done. So I believe this is one of the option out of two. Daily stand-up meeting, it helps in collaboration. It brings transparency. You may end up discussing some scope related thing if they are going haywire, but not necessarily directly contributing to control scope or gold plating kind of event. Whereas the D, the continuous stakeholder engagement, definitely takes care of gold plating and scope creep. So it is not like that we take the requirement once and then only after a pretty much long time we will come back and we will show the things. If that's the case, then we need to have an extra process to ensure the scope is controlled. But since we are on a regular basis interacting with the stakeholders, product owner is one of the one who is representing the stakeholders. During iteration reviews also, we are regularly interacting with the stakeholders. So continuous stakeholder engagement and agreement on definition of done, from my perspective, are the best two options which are coming for this particular question.
Question 6.
Which of the following is recommended way to define definition of done? Let's look at the options. The project manager creates it based on historical data, maybe lesson learned or something. Product owner makes it based on the project need. Option B. The project team develops it. In consultation with the stakeholder, the project team develops it. So B and C are more or less overlapping, but yeah, that's the slight difference between C and D. You can pause, pick your option. Okay, so I believe this is an easy question in a relatively. Once you understand the concept of definition of done, you know what is the purpose of it, and in order to achieve that purpose, who should be defining it? Yeah. So in general, we don't recommend project manager defining something which is kind of defining the work of the team. So it has to be done by someone else than project manager. Project manager can facilitate the discovery of definition of done, but he or she should not define the definition of done. Now, the question gave a little clue about historical data, which makes it little tempting that, yeah, you might check the definition of done of the previous project and you tell that, okay, guys, let's start with this. But each project might have a unique understanding, unique requirement. The previous definition of done might be useful, but project manager cannot just define it on his own. Product owner makes it based on the project need. Now, this seems to be the another candidate option, or I would say trap options. So there is a clear understanding that definition of done is something which is a team's job, a collaborative job, rather than a product owner's job or someone who is representing the requirements job. Someone who represents the business or the requirement can tell about a user story or can tell about the requirement and definitely works significantly more than other team members to discover the acceptance criteria for that user story or a requirement. But the definition of done is more at a deliverable level, which is common for multiple product backlog item. And we can understand the first line in definition of done might say meet the acceptance criteria, which are defined by the business. And then it may have other things as we go along. So product owner cannot define it alone because the definition of done includes some internal quality points, quality checks as well. Yeah, so that particular knowledge, that particular insight, the product owner alone may not have. Now, as I said, C and D are a little bit overlapped. Now, C tells that project teams develops it, yes, but it has to be developed in consultation with the stakeholders. So stakeholder could be a product owner or the other business stakeholders, because once created, the definition of done helps us in defining or kind of creating an agreement that when we finish a particular product backlog item, these are the items which gets done. Yeah. Sometimes the definition of done may include, say, a customer release, that each items only can be marked completed when it relates to the customer. But sometimes when you are in the initial stage of your product development, the customer release step might not be there. So it is something, it has multiple areas, and since it takes care of multiple dimensions related to the completeness of a particular product backlog item, which is getting inside the iteration, it should be developed collaboratively. And project manager can facilitate that collaboration in order to develop a definition of done. So for me, this is the option which I go with. In consultation with stakeholder, that project team develops it. And project teams include the product owner and whoever is working in this particular project.
Question 7.
Which of the following defines the user story? Yeah, let me read it again. Which of the following best defines the user story? And usually this happens that we may end up missing this word best. Okay. Option A, user story defines the requirement in developer's language. User story defines a small requirement that can be developed in iteration. User story defines the key product requirements. Okay. User story defines the product goal. I think it's a simple question, but maybe the choices are tricky. I pause and let you pick up your choice, and then I talk about my opinion. Okay, so first thing is we should not forget the word best. Yeah, and then let's explore what are the options we have and how right or wrong they are about the user story. Now, user stories defines the requirement in developer's language. Definitely no, because it is not about developer's language. It is about the user's language. It is all about what user want to do. That's the whole idea of user story. So it is not about developer's language. So that's something out. User story defines a small requirement that can be developed in iteration. In my view, this is the right option, but we will explore it once we come back. We go with C and D first. User story defines the key product requirements. Now, user story can define a key product requirement, can also define non-key product requirement, but it is not much specifically attached to key features or key product requirements. And many times, the key product requirements might be large or in size, means they might take few iterations before they get developed. So we can't just say the key requirements of the product are defined in the form of user story. So it's a difficult statement to make. At the same time, the user story might be referring to a key small requirement. The idea of small is too much attached with user story. Yeah. So it's a possible alternative, but when we have an option, better option, then probably we have to sacrifice option C. D, user story defines the product goal. Not, so user story is a small increment of requirement. And how do you define small? It means it should be small enough so that it get done as per definition of done in a given iteration. So the option B, which is primarily talking about, it defines a small requirement that can be developed in an iteration, and the requirement should be adding value to the end user or the consumer of that product, is something which is which defines best the user story. Yeah. So this is what I can think about user story for this particular question.
Question 8.
What is the best approach to prepare requirement traceability metrics in Agile-based projects? Okay, RTM in Agile, let's see what are the options. RTM is a part of definition of done. Okay, RTM is prepared in a retrospective meeting. RTM is usually not needed. Product owner prepares RTM. Okay, so this seems to be tricky. I pause and let you choose your choices. Okay, this time I go directly with my answer first, and then only I talk about something else. And rather than I just talk about my option, which I believe is the right option in such kind of context. So the idea of requirement traceability metrics is primarily to ensure that we have tracking of all the requirements which are given to us at an end-to-end level. Yeah. Now, since we are working in a small incremental way, and we are always collaborating with the stakeholder, we may not need to create, I'm using may not need to create a separate requirement traceability matrix to ensure that we are meeting the requirement which we agreed before. Because we are just working for a few weeks, showing the stakeholders are looking at it, either they are accepting it or they are rejecting it. So we can say, if I use a project management language, we are doing validate scope very frequently. And since the validate scope is happening very frequently, which means the requirements and the working deliverables are getting matched and validated very frequently, we may not need a separate document to track that thing, because the running software can help us in doing it. Having said that, there could be some cases where the compliance needs are there, where you need to submit such kind of traceability, at least for portion of your requirement. You might end up preparing a requirement traceability matrix. So that's why it is not clear no or yes, and that's why I pick up option C. Now let's look at other options just to clarify that, okay, how well we understand the perspective related to requirement traceability metrics. So RTM is a part of definition of done. Not necessarily it's a part of definition of done. You may not have to maintain a matrix as a part of definition of done. So definition of done is definition of done, and requirement traceability matrix is RTM. Yeah. When needed, you need to prepare it separately. It can't be a part of definition of done. So RTM is prepared in a retrospective meeting. So there is no business of retrospective meeting and RTM. So it seems to be a little bit not related, because retrospective meeting is all about inspecting and adapting on our process part of it, rather than and focusing on traceability of requirement. Now, product owner prepares requirement traceability matrix. It might happen, that's a possibility, but not a standard job. So anyone can prepare it when it is needed. We don't have a dedicated guy who is expected to do a requirement traceability matrix preparation. Product owner is expected to discover the product backlog and prioritize it, but not necessarily prepare the requirement traceability matrix. So this is what I can say about this particular question.
Question 9.
Which of the following statement is not true about epics? Epics represent a bigger requirement as compared to user story. Okay, epics get split into small user stories before we develop them. Okay, epics are recorded in product backlog. Epics must be completed in one iteration. So I take a pause and let you explore your option. Do remember, it's all about not. Okay, I go with this because I believe other three are the characteristics of epic. Yeah. So epic describes a big requirement. The definition of epic is it is something large in size which cannot be developed in one iteration. That's why we call it epic. And when you have such kind of large element, actually you never work directly on epic. You split the epic into smaller user stories, not necessarily in a one go. You may have a large epic, you may extract 2 stories out of it, develop them, then may extract 3 stories out of it, next iteration, then develop it. But over a period of time, you are expected to split the epic. It's possible that you may start splitting in multiple story in a one go also, but that's not necessary to be followed all the time. So epic gets split into smaller user stories before we develop or work on them, because we work on small items which can be finished in a given iteration. And since epic is big, it cannot be finished in one iteration. So we never work directly on the epic. We split them into the user stories. Now, epic is a part of product backlog. So we can usually, you see the description of a product backlog coming in, and you can see there are items which are small. And as you go down, you start seeing the large size. The depiction represent the items which are not yet on priority. The whole idea of agile way of working with the requirement is progressive elaboration. We should not be elaborating things in advance. So we should do just in time, because we are discovering and learning about the requirement incrementally. So I should not be creating a very refined, detailed product backlog 3 months in advance or 6 months in advance. Because if I do that, whatever I have worked this week or next week or 2 weeks together, and I discover some learning, I am not including those learning. So I do just in time, and we can identify what is that just in time rigor for a given project. So incrementally, we are expected to split these epics into small user stories and get the things done. And that's why they are part of a product backlog, but we are not working on them directly in a given iteration. So epic, the definition of epic is it takes more than one iteration. That's why we can't say that it must get completed in a one iteration.
Question 10.
During the iteration, an agile team discovers that it is not feasible to implement one of the user stories acceptance criteria. So you have a user story which has multiple acceptance criteria, but one of the acceptance criteria seems to be not feasible now. What should the team do? Option A, leave the user story and work on other stories. Yeah, so you have multiple stories, you can work on something else. Discuss with the product owner to find alternatives. Take the story to the product owner and say, what can we do here? We have a user, we have an acceptance criteria, seems to be not feasible to implement it. Can you remove something or do something else about it? Put the story back in the product backlog. You are working on things, something is seems to be troubling. Maybe mark it not done or something and put it back into the product backlog. Say, yeah, we are making it back. Later on, we will discuss what do we do about it. As of now, we are removing it. Raise this in the upcoming retrospective meeting. Yeah, so you may say, okay, this is happened, and we will talk about it in the retrospective meeting, and we do by the time something else. So maybe it works with some other options as well, but we are saying, okay, the best thing to do about this situation is talk about it in a retrospective meeting. Okay, pick your choice. Then I will talk about my opinion related to these 4 options. Okay, so for me, yeah, the option B is good. That is something I would like to pick as a right option. But let's discuss other options as well, so that we develop our understanding related to such kind of scenarios. So the situation is like this. You are working on a given user story which has an acceptance criteria. Now, sometime you may start interpreting, once we have picked the user story, we must finish end to end. That's the definition of done, and that's the whole idea about user stories are. But at the same time, you also have a negotiable part in a user story, which means there is never late to talk about if something is going wrong in a given user story. It's never late to get some clarifications related to the user story. So we are not talking about a silos approach or a baseline approach that we get some baseline user story in the beginning of iteration, and now we do everything and only talk about these user story at the end of an iteration. We should not take that. Yeah. So once we understand the collaboration can happen all the time, we should do something about it because we have a situation at hand. And that's why option B goes good. Now, putting back into the product backlog and then waiting for the retrospective meeting to happen, that's not a good idea, because this is undermining the whole collaboration. So we should collaborate with the business, with the stakeholder, the product owner, in many cases represent the business for the team and find out what is right for a given situation. Yes, we can talk about this situation if these things are happening very frequently in the retrospective meetings. But as of now, when we discover it, we should quickly discuss it for the earliest possible opportunity with our product owner. And that's why I go with option B as the right option for this question.
Question 11.
Question looks a little complicated, looks like a big question. And in your PMP exam, you can expect some percentage of such kind of questions. This question is in complete alignment with PMI guidelines for PMP questions. Yeah, so don't undermine it by saying, oh, it might be out of the track. It is a good question for your preparation, like others as well. So let's look at the question. The project manager is using invest method to check the quality of three stories in the product backlog. So we have 3 stories. Story 1, as a user, I want to be able to select upcoming Sunday using a calendar. Okay, yeah. As a frequent traveler, I want to see my reward points balance to plan the uses. Okay. Story 3, as a travel agent, I want to see booking done today to project the revenue for the day. Okay. What is the evaluation result of these 3 stories? So in a way, out of these 3 stories, as per your opinion, which are the good one, or in a way follow the invest criteria? So options are pretty much like just selecting which one is good and which one is not. So A talks about story 1 and story 2, B talks about story 2 and story 3, C talks about story 1 and 3, and D talks about all the stories. So basically we need to identify the stories out of these 3 stories which are meeting the invest criteria. I take a pause and let you pick up your choices. Okay, so I'm assuming that this word is not confusing you. So if it is, better you get ready for such kind of acronyms and other things, because they may mean very simple stuff, but if you find them first time in your exam, you may feel little anxious. So invest is a way of defining a good user story. Yeah. So you can say, oh, how do I identify this user story is good to go in a given iteration, because you want to pick it, you should be small enough and all. Yeah. So what is this invest? So I stand for independent, which means that the story should be as far as possible independent. It can be evaluated end to end by just looking at this user story. Yeah. Sometimes you may not have an independent user story, but you should always aspire to have independent user stories. Now, negotiable, N stands for negotiable, which is indicating that stories may get negotiated while the execution happening also. So like some acceptance criteria may get clarified. It's never late to fix the user story. Yeah. Even if it is under ongoing development, it's never late. Yeah. We should be able to talk about it all the time. There is no bureaucracy attached to the thing which is defined in a user story. The V stands for, it should be valuable to your user, your consumers. That's the part of it. It should deliver a small piece of value to a user, to a consumer. And usually when you see as a XXX, so particular person who is starting or consuming it, that person should get some value out of it. Now, EST, it should be estimatable, it should be small enough, and it should be testable. Now, the testability may only get well refined when you have acceptance criteria get added. That's the key. So just from a user story statement, you should get an idea, is it testable or it is two-way? That's the specificity of it. Estimatable and small is also depends upon what is your definition of small. Yeah. So a set of your project team or your team which is developing it, they come together, they estimate the user story, and they need to have their definition of small, which means it should be fitting in a given iteration. Now, just by looking at these user stories, it might be very difficult to talk about estimatable, small, and all the elements, because they are very specific to a particular team. But we can identify that which one are from looking at it, which one are the good user stories. So the user story 1 is clearly showing some gaps. First is, it is not talking about who is this user. So it is giving a very generic definition of as a user. So usually, now you may find some content where it is still written as a user, but usually we should talk about who is that user, like a frequent traveler or a travel agent, a particular user persona or a user group. So we talk about a little bit more detail about who is this guy who is using it. And it is saying, I want to be able to select a coming Sunday using a calendar. Now, what do you do with it? How this thing is adding value to it? It's not clear. Yeah, it might be small, but the whole thing is the value and the purpose of doing this is not clear. And who is doing is also is not clear. Yeah. So it could be an independent. Yeah, it may not be independent also, because you might be selecting the calendar in order to get something done. Yeah, it's just not like that you select a calendar and Sunday and something happens. So that part is not clear in this particular user story. Story 2 and 3 are looking good to me. So as a frequent traveler, so it clarifies the who is user. I want to see my reward points. Yeah, so that's what has to be done is pretty much clear to plan the uses. So the value delivery is I want to plan my reward point uses. So I want to log in the system and see it. Yeah. Now, it seems to be a small requirement, but the small part is difficult to predict just by looking at this particular question. But it seems to be a well testable thing, because as if I have this feature done, I should be able to do and see, can I see the reward plan points and can I plan the uses? So this seems to be good to me. And similarly, the story 3, as a travel agent, so there is a clarity on user. I want to see booking done today. So there is a clear understanding, the bookings done. It could be like a report to project the revenue for the day. Yeah, so I want to understand what has happened, and I can calculate what is the money I'm going to get at the end of the day. So to me, the story 2 and story 3 are looking good. And I do recommend practicing a little bit more about these user stories and their formats. You do expect a few questions in your PMP exam where such kind of things might get tested. So finally, talking about the choices, it's pretty clear for me that option 2, so story 2 and 3 are good. Yeah, I may not 100% agree that I can evaluate their invest, but yeah, they are good relative to whatever options are available to me, because I can't select D. All stories are not good because A is out of it. Yeah, and I can't, wherever the story 1 is there, I have to remove that particular option, and that's why I get the option B as a good option for this question.
Question 12.
Another question seems to be a little long one again. In the iteration review meeting, your team has received the following feedback. Okay, the completed stories are not on business priorities. The team has not tested the stories for compliance requirements. Okay, overall stakeholders are not satisfied with the work. What should the project manager do next? Okay, so team got some serious feedbacks. Work with the stakeholders and take formal detailed feedback. That's what a project manager can do, probably. 1, option A. Option B, work with the product owner to ensure requirement prioritization. Seems to be requirement prioritization was missing, so product owner should fix it. Option B, revisit definition of done. Seems to be the compliance requirements are not getting included in definition of done, so probably you need to revisit the definition of a compliance requirement or a definition of done again. Seems to be a good idea again. Yeah, but that's a candidate option. And the final option D is work with the project team in the retrospective meeting to identify next steps. Okay, I let you choose your option and then I talk about it. Okay, so in my view, the option D is good. Now, other things might come here and there, but D seems to be the best option. Yeah, sometimes you have options which you have more than one possible actions, but you need to identify which one is the best one. Now, why the D is the best? You may say it clearly shows the lack in prioritization. It clearly shows the definition of done or a compliance requirement was not understood to be a part of completion. That seems to be a clear feedback coming in. And there could be a value in getting more information from the stakeholders also. So that seems to be a valued one, but B and C are pretty much clear to you as a cause when you see this particular thing. But at the same time, the question might be trapping you by giving you all these hints, by making you do and act as per your perception. So the whole idea in general, whenever I have an option, I should choose more facilitative approach. And here I have an option to go more facilitative. So it is like usually iteration review is followed by iteration retrospective. So you are about to do that. Yeah, that's about to happen next as a next activity or an event in case of your iteration. So that's a good place to talk about these feedbacks. And we need to talk together to find out how do we act upon or improve on something which happened in the previous iteration. So as a project manager, you should ensure that team look at these issues in the iteration review. They spend enough time exploring what went wrong and how can we come up with our improved action plan, which can take care of our alignment with the business value delivery, which might result into more collaboration between product owner and the stakeholder for prioritization, a betterment or a better involvement, or right people getting involved in a backlog refinement meeting, which might focus on revisiting the definition of done and looking at what all compliance requirement should be a part of each completion of a particular item or a product backlog item, or it may result into a separate item for compliance requirements also. So depending upon the type and nature of the project, these things will get fixed, but team can find out while working as a one group.
Question 13.
The Agile team is tasked to build a smart 4 application to support drug users rehabilitation. Okay. Unfortunately, the team cannot find volunteer test user fitting the profile. Okay. Which option would be most effective to ensure the best product value is delivered? Option A, do a detailed requirement analysis for user needs. Okay. Option B, release the basic version of the application and learn from its uses. Develop the product based on similar competitor products. Create a detailed WBS to capture the project requirements. Pick your option, and then I talk about what I feel is good in this particular situation. Okay, so what I see here is the option B. Now let me clarify why I believe the option B is the good option. The first thing here is the question is clearly saying Agile team. So just to clarify that they are giving a hint that product has to be developed incrementally. Product had to be applied incremental and iterative approach. That's something we are picking up. The another thing we are picking up is that the exact understanding of the requirement is not present, or exact validation of the requirement is not present, because you are targeting a customer segment. In your team, nobody has that experience or a feeling, or you don't know how exactly it is needed. So a detailing of it is missing. That's a second characteristic which we are getting from the question. So as soon as we hear the word Agile, so the detailed options are out. Yeah. So these two options are anyway out because we are working in the Agile way. Now, option B and C. So C is possible good, but again, the agility is not there. And what we are not learning, yeah, we are just copying something which is in market. So over B and C, we pick B because B is talking about putting something in the market and learning from its uses. Yeah. Whereas C has some incline towards predictive requirement, that assuming that whatever the competitors are doing, that's a good thing. Why don't we also replicate it? Now, if you just replicate what competitors are doing, then why should not your client buy from the competitor only? So it could be a good starting point. It could be a requirement for the first version of it, but your real exploration should be in the Agile way of working, should be dependent on what your end users are giving you the feedback, how you learn from your customer uses. Yeah. So it is like the terminology we use, we release minimum viable product, we see what all hypotheses are coming true, and based on the learning of those hypotheses, we decide how do we move forward, or what kind of a direction change we should take. And that seems to be the concept which this particular question is testing. So you are working in the environment where you have less knowledge, and you should do a quick, small experiments, learn, and then move forward. That's the whole idea of Agile ways of working.
Question 14.
During iteration planning, the team finds it difficult to estimate and plan some of the product backlog items because these items are not detailed enough for sprint planning, sprint/iteration planning. How can such situation be avoided? Option A, the product owner should define the test criteria before discussing the product backlog items. Yeah, seems to be a good option. Option B, as per the agreement in the definition of ready, the product backlog item should be ready. Okay. Option C, as per the agreement in the definition of done, the backlog item should be ready. Okay, so seems to be the difference between B and C is definition of ready and definition of done. So we need to figure it out which one to use. Option D, the product owner should create a detailed requirement before discussing the backlog item. You should come up with a detailed requirement, maybe a document for each requirement. Okay, pick up your option and then I talk about my option. You may pause, think, and then we continue. Okay, so in my view, this question is primarily testing the understanding of definition of ready and trying to confuse you with definition of ready and definition of done, and also trying to confuse you that what all might be included in definition of ready. So the definition of ready might include proper definition of acceptance criteria, not necessarily test criteria, but some set of acceptance criteria might be there, might not be there. It depends upon the understanding and the nature of work you are working on. And it may require some other details also, but those details cannot be just labeled as detailed. Yeah, we can say enough detail. So the whole idea here is that you have an iteration, yeah, and you are doing iteration planning meeting. And if there are items which are coming to discuss here, and they are very vaguely understood, and if team starts looking at them in this meeting itself, they may not be able to make a good plan for upcoming iteration. So that's why we do a backlog refinement activity. It can be done as a part of a meeting in the previous iteration or differently, depending upon that. And that should make in a product backlog that item should be well refined, well understood, so that when the team works on it, at least those items which are expected to get done in this particular iteration should be well understood and well refined. Now, what is well? What is well understood? What is well refined? How do we have a common understanding of it? So in order to develop a common agreement of what is considered as ready, one can come up with a definition of ready. In general, it is not a very standard concept of Scrum. Yeah, the Scrum only tells that broad backlog item should be ready enough. But in the PMP exam space, I see this concept getting tested frequently. So always attach the definition of ready about the readiness of the product backlog item for the upcoming planning and development in a given iteration. So that's the whole idea of this particular question in my view. And that's why I can say that the option B is the right option, because we should have a detailed enough product backlog item, and that detailed enough can be defined as a definition of ready. And that helps us in doing good sprint / iteration planning.
Question 15.
Which of the following can the Agile team use to communicate long-term product development direction? Let's look at the choices. Release plan, project plan, product roadmap, iteration plan. You can pause and think about this particular question and pick your choice. Okay, so it's time for me to pick my choices. Let's go one by one this time and explore what these terms really mean. Release plan. So this seems to be a candidate option because the release plan helps us in projecting in upcoming subsequent iteration. How are we going to achieve a product goal or a release goal? But it does not show a long-term development direction. So the idea of release plan is it's kind of short to medium term. It's not short because iteration plan is more short. You can say a medium term, and it is giving more details, and it's a plan rather than just showing the direction. So though it's a relevant document in case of agile ways of working, but not necessarily meeting the keyword which I'm picking here is a direction. So it's not a direction, it's a plan. Yeah, so we can get away from the option A. Option B, project plan. Now, since we are focusing on agile ways of working and we are focusing on the direction, not the plan, so we can fairly assume that in the agile way of working, we are progressively going to do our planning. The rolling wave planning, progressive elaboration is the kind of things we are going to use. So we cannot say that we have a project plan which can give us a long-term direction. So for me, the option C is the right option because the option C is talking about product roadmap. So roadmap, you have a vision and you are showing how over a period of time, maybe a multi-years, you are going to achieve or materialize that vision and which all milestones or releases may come in between in order to achieve the product vision. So product roadmap gives us long-term development direction. It also works as a collaborative tool to bring alignment on the priorities as well as high-level goals. High-level priorities and high-level goals, detailed prioritization happens in the product backlog. So for me, this is the right option. Iteration plan, as we know, it is specific for the given iteration. It's pretty much in detail, but it only talks about a particular iteration. So that's how the option C, which is product roadmap, seems to be a good option in this particular situation.
Question 16.
Which of the following is not true about a product roadmap? Not true. Let's look at the options. Display the strategy and direction of the product. Are progressively elaborated over time. Provide short-term and long-term visualization of the product. Get baseline for tracking variances. Pick up your option and then we explore one by one as we go. Okay, so let's see. Display the strategy and direction of the product. I think this one is easy to pick and say, this is true. I can't say this is not true because the product roadmap is expected to show the direction for our product. So this is perfectly true. Are progressively elaborated over time. So what does it mean? So the idea here is the direction is laid out, but the detail inside that direction will get refined and elaborated and adjusted over a period of time. So which means product roadmaps are expected to get elaborated, explained, and modified as we go along. That's something we can say is indicated by the option B. Now, sometimes you may feel, no, it should give us a clear path. That is not necessarily true. It laid out the path, but the clarity in the path is going to emerge as we go along. As we start traveling on the path, we will know how we need to refine it, how we need to adjust it in order to achieve the given product vision. So this option is right. So it is true about the product roadmap. We can't say it is not true. It provides short-term and long-term visualization of the product. So I can say that this also relates with the option B. In a product roadmap, the things which are coming in the near term might be elaborated well. Things which are coming in the long term might be at a high level, at an abstract level, at a forecast level. But over a period of time, as we reach there, we will elaborate them because we are doing progressive elaboration. So it is true, it gives us a short-term and a long-term visualization of the product direction. Now, the only left with the option D, which seems to be the answer here, because that seems to be a not true option here. So let's explore that. Get baseline for tracking variances. Now, you have a product roadmap at a very, very high level. For variances purpose, you can't use a variance against the product roadmap. Yeah, that's not a usual practice because it doesn't serve that much purpose. You may track things which are detailed plan, which have a detailed agreement. Say you may have a release date, a planned release date, and you may want to track variances against that planned release date, but you don't have usually get value by tracking variances against the roadmap because roadmaps are made with high uncertainty at a very high level, which has an ambiguity attached. So over a period of time, these things are going to be refined. So tracking them against the baselines or baselining a product roadmap and tracking it for a monitoring purpose may not serve much value for a team. So that's why we can pick up and say that this option is not true about the product roadmap.
Question 17.
You're planning a kickoff meeting for a project. Which of the following can help establishing the project context? So this is coming from your first lesson if you are following PMI ATP content, where you are focusing on creating a high-performing team and finally getting to establishing the project context. Now, before I speak much, let's look at the 4 options. Yeah. Option A, vision. Option B, release plan. Option C, project schedule. And option D, project scope statement. Yeah. So I take a pause and let you pick your option. You are planning a kickoff meeting for a project. Which of the following can help establishing the project context? Okay. For me, the choice is option A. Option A seems to be the perfect match in this particular place. Now, you may say that, the project scope statement may give us a better project context. The project schedule or a release plan may give us a better project context. So why don't I use those things? Yeah, because they may help me in communicating about the whole matter in a fair details. Now, we need to pick up what is the context of this particular question. So you are planning a kickoff meeting for a project. So the idea here is you are just getting started. And when you are getting just started, you are not expected to have that much visibility, because things will emerge once your people, your team will start working with you, when you will start doing stakeholder interviews and collecting ideas and coming up with a project scope statement. And over a period of time, if you are using predictive lifecycle, you go into a project schedule. If you are using the agile way of working, over a period of time, you populate your product roadmap and you populate your product backlog. And after doing that product backlog refinement, you probably come up with a release plan and the iteration plan. So that is something is going to happen over a period of time. But in the beginning, when you are setting up the project context in the agile way of working, or even if a generic way of working, irrespective of way of working, project vision, project charter, the initial understanding, the project context statement might be useful in order to establish the project context. So in this particular case, option A is the clear option for this question.
Question 18.
User testing on the last product release revealed low user interest in specific features requiring significant development effort. Okay, what can the agile team do to prevent this disparity in the future? Select 2. So you need to pick 2 right options out of 4 available. Track burn down chart regularly. Improve product backlog refinement process or a product backlog refinement process. Use work in progress limits for user testing. Do frequent incremental releases to validate value delivery. Looks tricky to me. Pick your 2 options and then we talk about it. Okay, so let's look at these options one by one. Track burn down chart regularly. So by tracking the burn down chart regularly, what you can achieve? You can probably detect if there is a deviation in the agreed release plan or in the agreed sprint plan or iteration plan. So you have an iteration plan in place and you are tracking the burn down chart to ensure that we are as per the plan. Now, ensuring that you are as per the plan for delivering the deliverables may not ensure that you are delivering something which will get liked by the end users. Because the problem this question is exposing is you developed something by spending good amount of time. When you took your product to the stakeholders, to the end users, they are not finding it that interesting. And you are figuring out, how can I produce something which interests my users, or at least I should not be spending my energy in producing something which is not making my users like that particular thing. So option A is out. I don't think that's a choice which we can do something here. Let's look at option B, improve backlog refinement process, or I should say product backlog refinement process. Now, Sometimes you get the clear idea of prioritization process because you might be thinking that there is some gap in prioritization. The right people are not involved for prioritization. And here you see a backlog refinement process. So is it the same thing or different? So the idea of backlog refinement is it may involve multiple activities, and prioritization is one of its activity. So it involves fine graining the existing product backlog items, adding more details to it, doing some estimation if the product backlog items are not yet estimated, and using all these detailing in order to prioritize the product backlog. So we do see that there is something missing in the backlog refinement process, or there is an opportunity to improve in the backlog refinement process. Maybe we need to involve right people. Maybe we need to look into the data which we are getting from the previous releases. But we should do maybe as identifying the right people, right frequency of backlog refinement. That could be also an issue. You might be doing refinement once in a month, but now you may need to do more frequently in order to ensure that we adapt what we are learning on our incremental deliverable. So that seems to be a very good option, that yes, there is a possibility, there is a scope which hints that yes, we can do some amount of improvement in our backlog refinement process. We need to pick up one more. Let's go further. Use work in progress limits for user testing. Now, applying work in progress limits makes the system flow faster at the user test level. In a way, indirectly, if we get faster results by the users by giving them few things for improvement, that probably help us in learning fast. There's a probability. Yeah, that's a probability. It depends upon what the other option tells us. Yeah, so let's keep it as a question mark, and let's move further. Yeah, do frequent incremental releases to validate value delivery. That seems to be a better option than C, because the idea here is, even if we involve stakeholders, even if we make the testing process faster, but if our releases are happening infrequently, means we are taking the refinements and doing things maybe after many iterations, only we are going to the customer and learning about what they are liking and not liking. So it might be a good idea, and that's the concept we learn as an MVP and frequent MBIs, that it's a good idea to do a frequent incremental releases so that we can get to know what is really adding value in our user or a customer base. So for me, option D looks good. So I will go with option B and option D if I have to face this question with these choices.
Question 19.
How can an agile team forecast the time to have a releasable product based on business goals? Okay, predicting where situations, requirements are unpredictable. So prediction in agile. Okay, let's see what are the options. By doing iteration planning, by doing release planning, by preparing the product roadmap, by estimating story point for complete product backlog. Okay, pick your choices. So let me share my idea. So how can an agile team forecast the time to have a releasable product? So the idea here is I need to forecast a time to have a releasable product. Yeah, and based on business goal. So the question is not talking about the set of requirements. The question is talking about the business goal. So it is clear the iteration planning is only focusing on given iteration. So that seems to be a not appropriate option here. So I get away from it. I can say the release planning looks good, as well as product roadmap looks good. By estimating story for complete product backlog, I need to focus on business goal. I may have a huge product backlog. So probably the future releases, releasable product increment may not require the whole product backlog. So complete product backlog and estimation of it probably is not needed. So I can go away with that particular option as well. So now we have two candidate options, option B and option C. Now I will go with option B. Reason is that the definition of release planning is primarily inclining towards giving a forecast of a time for a releasable product for achieving a desired business goal. Whereas a product roadmap is talking about the strategic development direction. Yeah. So it is more focusing on setting the path rather than predicting a timeline for an upcoming business goal or an upcoming business-based release. So by doing the release planning, I can answer the stakeholders' question related to when can we have this goal met. Now, some of you may start thinking, if we have that thing, we must have a baseline or finalized scope for that duration. The idea here is the release planning is helping us to predict a releasable product, but it is still based on a business goal, not based on a detailed requirement. So there could be an adjustment in the requirement if it is needed in order to achieve the business goals. So we are still adapting. We are not finalizing the scope. We are still exploring, but yes, we do focus on achieving a given business goal. And that's what we get by selecting the option B in this particular question. So by doing release planning, I can achieve this goal.
Question 20.
Your team is getting ad hoc work while performing transition activities. Which of the following scheduling approach may work best? Option A, iterative scheduling. Option B, on-demand scheduling. Option C, critical path scheduling. Option D, rolling wave planning. You can pause, think. Your team is getting ad hoc work while performing transition activity. How do you facilitate scheduling when things are emerging ad hoc? Which possible option might help you in doing that? Okay, so I pick up option B as my choice. Let me explain. So the idea here is what I'm reading from the question, my way of reading is that we are in a transitioning space, which means our deliverables are going to the end users and they are using it. And during that particular time, things are coming here and there. Some user is liking something, some user is asking something. So my team is getting ad hoc work from here and there. So ad hoc work indicates that I can't plan it in advance. I can't say for this week, we are going to do this all because the work will come ad hoc, or I cannot make a whole schedule for my transitioning thing at a very activity level details. So that's the situation I am facing. Now in such situation, on-demand scheduling is a good option. So on-demand scheduling is that we create a pull-based system where the work becomes visible and we have a mechanism of showing the workflow. And based on the capacity available, based on the priority of incoming item, the team or the individuals can pick up the work and get things moving. So usually you see the example of Kanban boards. The Kanban way of working, lean way of working are usually explained when we talk about on-demand scheduling. So you have a mechanism where work is displayed. You have a mechanism to show that how many items can be at this particular stage in a given point in time by putting work in progress limits. And whenever the capacity is available, the work move to the next stage. And by doing it, we finish the work. Yeah. So if some urgent issue comes in, we know how to classify something urgent and how we see where the capacity is available. We may have a policy or rule associated with such kind of work coming in, and that helps us in doing a better responding, or that helps us in better responding to things which are coming very ad hoc, in a very ad hoc manner. So for me, in this question, I will pick up the option B, on-demand scheduling.
Question 21.
On the last day of an iteration, an agile team has 3 out of 7 items at 90% completion. Team estimate it will take just 1 more day to finish these 3 items, and they can achieve 100% of the iteration goal. How should the project manager deal with this situation? So what's the right thing to do when you have this situation? You have a need of just 1 more day, and that can help your project or iteration goals rather than project iteration goal reach or touch the 100% of mark. Let's see what are the options. Extend the iteration by 1 day. Seek advice from stakeholders. Option B. Option C, recommend closing the iteration with current completion. Option C. Option D, start the next iteration as per schedule without closing the current. Pick up the one which works for you. You need to pick up the best and with the available informations only. Don't have to add extra thing in a given situation. Think like it's coming in the exam. Okay, so I feel in a real world, as a project manager, you might have worked or might have taken all the possible 4 options at different situations. But you might also be knowing which one is most recommended if we just follow a good practice and we don't bring other exceptions or sequence or situations in account. Yeah. So let's look at one by one. Extending the iteration by 1 day. Now, in general, when we talk about time boxing, which means it has to finish on the day we have predicted it has to finish. So which means the iterations which we are running are expected to start and finish on a defined date. We cannot breach that. That's the whole idea of time boxing. Now, it may look very attractive that I just need 1 day and that can like fix up all the issues. You know, I can show that we have 100% iteration goal, because in the absence of that, I may only have a 60% or something as an iteration goal, assuming all iterate or like all topics are more or less of the same weightage. Yeah, so it might look a good idea, but then I am violating the basic fundamental principle of time boxing, which recommend us to fix the time. The reason is, if you start doing it once, you might keep doing more and more frequently, and you never know 1 day is needed or 2 days are needed or 3 days are needed. You will only come to know once the 1 day is passed. So there is a complexity we are inviting if we start playing with the boundaries of the time box. So please, especially in the exam context, be very careful of violating the rule of time boxing. So option A is not at all a good option. Yeah, may look very good, but not at all a good option when you are giving the exam. Seek advice from stakeholders. Now it is like this. Oh, I have a situation. I need to go to someone, say PMO or some support person and ask them what to do. Maybe a good idea, but why? If you can decide yourself. So we need to see what are the other options. Can I just decide based on the basic way of working we have agreed upon? Yeah. So let's see option C. Recommend closing the iteration with current completion. That seems to be the best option for me. So the idea here is wherever we stand, as per the time box, we need to close it. It's an event which help us in reflecting on what has been done. And then we retrospect and find out how do we avoid this situation in future, what we can do to improve it. That is something is a retrospective discussion rather than doing some adjustment here as of now. So that seems to be the best option or best thing to do in a given situation. Option D, start the next iteration as per the schedule without closing the current. Yeah, I have seen in a real world many people doing it, but it is not at all a good idea to do that. So it's like this. Oh, we are starting the next iteration, but for this iteration, we may take few more days and then we will close it. Yeah. And then you have a 2 iterations running without closing the previous iteration. You are in a new iteration, and people are also confused. Some of your team members are working in the previous iteration. Some of the team members have moved to the next iteration, and the whole process looks complicated because the amount of effort invested in the next iteration is also difficult to predict because some amount of leakage is happening in the previous iteration as well. So you might have seen such kind of things in your organization happening when such kind of situation occurs, but it is not at all a good idea because it confuses the whole process and hampers our collection of data like velocity number by getting stakeholder engagement at the iteration boundaries like iteration reviews, reflecting on what was working, what was not working. So all those the things start getting disturbed when we start taking these kind of workarounds. So the option C is the best option in this particular situation.
Question 22.
Which of the following are needed to do release planning? Select 3. I usually like these kind of questions where we have to select more than one. And the question is also of a half-liner or one-liner. And don't think that these kind of questions will not appear in the PMP exam. If you are lucky enough, you may see many one-liner or half-liner questions as well. Yeah, but it's very difficult to predict, but it exists. Okay, so let's get into the question. Which of the following are needed to do a release planning? Release goal, resource calendar, estimated velocity, estimated product backlog, definition of ready. So you can pick up the way you want. You need to identify 2 which are not needed for release planning and 3 which are needed for release planning. So you just need to make 2 categories out of these 5, 3 needed, 2 not needed. Yeah. You may want to pause and check it out, these options further before I share my ideas. Okay, let's go one by one. So release goal is the starting point. You have to do a release planning. You need to know what is the goal of this particular release. So goals could be that we want to make our system compliant with newly published change by the regulators. That could be a release goal. The goal could be that we want to have a fundamental functionality out in the market so that people start using it. That could be a release goal. The release goal could be that we want to push our MVP in the market. So we are doing MVP release so that we can learn about it. So we need to have an understanding, what are we trying, what is the purpose of doing this release. And with goal, we will figure it out what goes inside it, because the inside content can evolve as we are working on the release, but goal has to be there. So it's a good idea to have a release goal, unless we have some other options which makes us do something otherwise. So as of now, I mark it, yes, we need it. Resource calendar. Now, in general, the agile way of planning is not individual level planning. It is not about who is taking leave when, what is their loading for this whole duration, or which all people are allocated for this much time. That is not needed. So what is needed instead is estimated velocity. Now, indirectly, the estimated velocity may consider who all will participate in the upcoming iterations in order to achieve this release goal. So number of team members, the overall, your holiday calendars and all those things will get under, or say will get accounted for when you estimate a velocity. Or if you have a historical velocity, you pick it from your past performances, and then you may do some adjustment based on what you see in the future, and then you estimate a given velocity. So rather than resource calendar, which is our predictive way of doing, where we know who is available when, the agile release planning is done by using estimated velocity. So we mark the option B no, and we pick up the option C as yes. So we have a 2, and now we are left with 2. Estimated product backlog, you need it. A fair amount of a product backlog, at least the one which is getting related to the release goal, the items which are linked with the release goals, those need to be estimated, because in the absence of that, how do I identify a timeline, a possible timeline, possible release date, if we don't have an estimated product backlog. Now, the 100% of the product backlog may not be estimated at that point in time as well, because you need to focus on the part of the one which is candidate for upcoming releases. But fair amount of product backlog estimation can be a good input for our release planning activity. It's a good thing, until unless we have a better option in B. Definition of ready seems to be just outlier. You may get tempted to pick it, seeing, oh, this seems to be an agile term, let's pick it. May not be needed. Definition of ready is more about facilitating the refinement of a product backlog over a period of time, and it's more like an agreement for the refinement purpose, but it has not much to contribute when we are doing the release planning. So release goal, estimated velocity, estimated product backlog, seems to be the good option for doing release planning.
Question 23.
Which of the following can help determining the rate at which the deliverables are produced, validated, and accepted? Throughput, burn down chart, burn up chart, cost performance index, CPI. Okay. So what I feel is it's easy to rule out the significance of cost performance index. That seems to be not relevant here because the cost performance index primarily talks about the difference or the ratio between the earned value and the actual cost. And it is more related with how we are adherence to the budget and how effectively we are using our money. So that's the major focus area for cost performance index. So we can rule that out. The remaining three, I believe they have some amount of information, which does help us in determining the rate at which deliverables are getting produced, validated, or accepted. So let's look at them one by one. So throughput is usually measured in a given time box. You want to see what all has been done. So how many deliverables has been produced in a given time box, or how many deliverables has been validated. Usually it is measured against that how many number of deliverables got done or a work item got done in a given duration. So with that definition, this seems to be the best option to me. But having said that, let's explore the burn down chart and burn up chart as well, because they may also help us in determining the rate at which the deliverables are getting produced. So burn down chart as well as burn up chart usually help us in seeing how the work is getting burned down or what is our burn rate. So in a way, if you have a time here and you see the chart is coming down like this, it is showing how the remaining work is getting reduced. And in a way, this particular slope does help us in identifying a possible rate at which deliverables are produced, validated, and accepted. Yeah, because if you are measuring the burn down chart at story point level, then this can indicate the number of produced, validated, accepted deliverables as well. So there is a possibility, though the major purpose of burn down chart is to show what is left and what is the trend. So it is more a trend oriented thing rather than a particular rate. So this slope can represent that, but still the throughput seems to be the more appropriate answer here, because the objective of throughput is primarily to tell about rate of delivery. I usually take an example. If you're a pizza store and you tell that in a given day we dispatched, say on average we dispatched 1,000 pizzas, and that's your throughput for the day, that shows that number of pizzas got produced, validated, and accepted in a given particular day, and that helps you in doing the planning for your upcoming capacity or upcoming days as well. So though the burn down chart as well as a burn up chart give some indication, but I will pick, if this question is put in front of me in the PMP exam, I need to choose the best one, and I will choose the option A as a winner option in this particular situation, because that's primarily about the rate of delivery.
Question 24.
An agile team is making good progress on key requirements, but defects on the deliverables are accumulating in the backlog. Most of the defects are minor and takes half a day to fix. Which approach would be most effective to stop the accumulation of minor defects? Okay, interesting question. Let's look at the option. Option A, reserve some capacity in the iteration for defect fixing. Option B, add special product backlog item to fix these defects. Option C, integrate the fixing of defects in definition of done. Start estimating the defects in story points. I feel the choice is difficult here, but I pause for a while and let you pick up your choices. In my view, I will go with option C, and let me explain why I think so. And I do believe that other options, all the remaining three options, has some value, and they can probably help us in reducing the defects, not necessarily in accumulation of defects, but they can definitely help us in reducing the defects. So let's go one by one. Reserve some capacity in the iteration for defect fixing. Now, this might be a good idea for already accumulated defects. Yeah. So you may say that, okay, we already have this much. So rather than just working on the new requirements, we seems to be doing good with the new requirements, but we are accumulating defects. So some percentage of our iteration capacity should be applied there. And it may reduce the total number of defects, not necessarily the newly arriving defects. So accumulation may still keeps happening, but since you are burning, so overall absolute accumulation, iteration may start reducing. So that seems to be a good option in general. So option B, add special product backlog item to fix these defects. So you may add one item or you may add multiple items in the product backlog where you focus on fixing those defects. So it's already saying that, yeah, you have accumulation of defects and you can add them into the backlog, and that may make it visible, and at some point in time you can fix it. But adding things in the backlog may not necessarily stop accumulation of it. Yeah. So it may make things visible. It may start giving a good focus in the conversation, but not necessarily takes care of incremental accumulation of the defects. Now, option D, start estimating the defects in story points. Now, estimation of defects and showing and quantifying those defects as a problem is a good idea. Probably that make people more aware of it, but awareness may lead to some action item, but just awareness is not helping me to directly stopping the accumulation of the new defects. Now let's look at the option C, which I selected as the preferred option from my side. Integrating the fixing of defects in the definition of done. So what does it mean? So the definition of done is an agreement which team is making among themselves as well with the stakeholder to tell that we will finish all this before we declare a particular backlog item complete. Yeah? So if they include the fixing of the defects as well, along with doing the requirement, or say minor defects as well, along with doing the requirement, then they won't mark these particular items fixed or done till the time these defects are also completed. So it's like this. I won't be able to say my key feature is complete if it has some minor defects. I better fix it then and there. So that's a preferred approach. There is also a clear data, as well as I'm sure most of you must have faced this experience, that fixing an issue when it is fresh, it is easy. But if these issues starts getting accumulated and then one issue may start getting related with the other issue, then fixing them may become more and more challenging. Usually the time to take fixing increases if we keep delaying that particular fixing. So looking at the idea of build quality in, they're looking at the idea of creating the right sense of completeness. The option C seems to be the best option, where we are saying we need to improve our definition of done, which should include the fixing of the minor defect in this particular question.
Question 25.
In a hybrid project, the Agile track expects a change to be implemented by predictive track. Okay, so I can assume there is an Agile track and there is a predictive track. It's a hybrid project. Both are included in the one project. Whereas the predictive track is waiting for the change control board approval. Okay, the delay in change approval is frustrating the Agile track. How can a project manager reduce such situations? Interesting situations. Yeah, and whenever you have these kind of hybrid situations, usually such kind of integration is the most challenging thing which project manager has to deal with. Let's look at the option. Option A, assign a single person to resolve such issues. So say any change issues related things, we have a manager. You can say X-axis manager who takes care of issue manager. We have an issue manager to deal with. Okay, option B, establish a clear mechanism to track the issues. So we may have a board and we put those issues on the board and everybody can see them if they are getting delayed, and then we have a clear awareness of tracking of these issues. So we have a close tracking. Improve communication between Agile and productive track. So there should be a better communication so that maybe the changes can be planned better, that can be resolved better, and that can help us in reducing such kind of situation where you are waiting for each other, be it change or something else. Yeah, delays are coming. Recommend adaptive ways of working for a complete project. So why the predictive life cycle is predictive? Why can't I make it agile? So I believe there could be many other options also. And in the PMP exam, when you have such situation, you may have your own ideas how to resolve it. But the good thing is that we have to select one out of available 4 options. So what I need to pick up is something which is most suitable and safe to assume that if I do it, it covers remaining 3 or it's better than 3. That's the whole idea which I am focusing on. So assigning a single person to resolve such issues might work. Yeah, it might be okay thing to do. You may have some mechanism to handling these issues. But in general, that single person may also becomes a bottleneck. So I need to see if putting this single person is helpful or it can create further issues, because if the single person is not handling it well, we may have a bigger mess. So in general, I need to know the detail about the situation before I can say the single person will be good or not good. That's something I need to see. I can't just see based on the question which I have in front of me. Establish a clear mechanism to track issues. It's a good idea. Tracking of the issues, communicating those issues, discussing them in various meetings, milestone reviews, making them visible is definitely this tracking will improve the resolution. That's clear cut there. Now, improving communication between agile and predictive track, that also a good option. Yeah. Now we need to choose out of B and C, and there could be a difference of opinion here, and it's a little controversial question in a way. But now the issue here is that should we have a good tracking that will help us in resolving things better, or we need to focus on reducing a situation. Yeah. Now the word which is coming towards here helps us in identifying which out of B or C I should pick up. So B can help me in resolving this situation, whereas a C will be more helpful in reducing such situations. So reducing such situations where we have a delays, we have a late information, and which is creating wait time, can be improved if we have maybe early identification of the issues, early processing of those issues. So I go with option C primarily because it is talking about reducing such a situation. Yeah, and I believe it's a very close touch between B and C. Now, somebody will say, why not D? We don't have a clear understanding to decide that let's go in agile. We need to assume that the project is in a hybrid way, and there must be some reasons to keep the predictive track as predictive track and agile track as agile track, without having clear understanding. Yes, we understand there is a delay in the approval of the predictive track, but it might be needed for that such kind of an organization because of compliance or some other reasons. So directly jumping to change the life cycle seems to be a not right thing to do when you are facing such kind of question. So for me, this is the answer. And do share if you have difference of opinion about this particular question with us.
Question 26.
Looks like a one-liner this time. Which of the following assist an agile team planning their day at work? Okay. Iteration planning, release planning, daily stand-up meeting, team charter. You can pick your choice. I do have my choice. So what I feel is, in a way, directly or indirectly, all 4 are influencing in planning the day at work. Yeah, so they all has some contribution to make. And that makes the question a little tricky. So I need to find out what is which one is the most appropriate for a given day. That's something I'm picking up. So we can say that release planning is something which might be helping me to see what all goals or what kind of a work we are going to do iteration on iteration. You may plan multiple iterations in a day. So in a way, that particular thing get further elaborated in the iteration plan. And then you have a day which is happening in a particular iteration. And overall, this whole thing is governed by how you work, how you interact with each other, is governed by team charter. So that helps us in doing our work in an appropriate way. So though the release plan influences the iteration plan and iteration plan influences your day work, but there is a clear indication that day work is primarily discussed in a daily stand-up meeting. Now, sometimes you may say, oh, but daily stand-up is all about taking stock of the situation. It is sometimes you think of that it is all about knowing what is happening, nothing more than that. So that's not the case. The idea of daily stand-up is knowing what is happening, and based on knowing what is happening, planning what should we do in the next 24 hours. What should we do in order to achieve our iteration goals? So it is a small review and planning meeting, or you can call it inspect and adapt meeting. And that's why in this particular question, this seems to be the best option, whereas other option also may have influence or that helps you in framing or creating what you are doing on that particular day. But directly, the daily stand-up is the thing which is influencing your day at work.
Question 27.
Who creates the iteration plan? Project manager, option A. Team, option B. C, Scrum Master, and D, product owner. You can pause if you want to think, but it seems to be a straightforward answer. At least picking an option should not take time. Small content. So let's look at one by one. Now, many of you might be coming from traditional project management background, and whenever the word plan comes in, you may think planning is the accountability and responsibility of a project manager. So whenever the plan is coming, I can fairly pick up project manager. Not true in case of agile way of working. So agile way of working, the project managers are more on facilitating space, more or less in an environment creation space, and letting, especially the detailed level planning, should be done by the team, not by the project manager. So that's the whole idea. So project manager goes out. Now, many of you may say, it's a Scrum Master job. I have seen in my company, Scrum Master creates the iteration plan. Now, that might be happening in your company, but that's not the right thing to do. So the idea here is we want to create a self-organizing team, and the essence of self-organizing team is the team should be able to plan their work, execute their work, monitor their work, adapt in their work so that they achieve the goal. But the leadership, project manager, product owner, whoever is there in the leadership space should help them in setting up the goal and direction and priorities. So it's like that we help them in identifying which product backlog items are the priority items, what is the goal of the iteration, but after that, planning the execution of that is a team's job. So in this question, we directly can go with the answer, a team. Now somebody will say, why not product owner? Product owner might facilitate, and the idea of a product owner role is that in an agile context, someone who is working closely with the business and finding out what is needed next, or might be having great insight about the business and finalizing what should we do next. So that's the role of a product owner, but the execution, the planning of that execution is primarily on the team. So whenever you see the question related to detailed planning, figuring out how should I do my job, in general, we should focus on the team or the individual who is executing it, because the overall essence of modern day of management is self-organizing and more autonomy for an execution to the person who is doing the job or to the team who is doing the job.
Question 28.
Which of the following are outputs of the iteration planning meeting? Select two. Okay. Iteration goal, iteration plan, definition of done, estimated product backlog. I let you choose your options. Now, what I believe in this particular question, the option A and B seems to be a clear, easy choices. You should not face any difficulty in picking A and B. This seems to be a very easy question. Now, if you are finding this question little difficult, it means you need to study a little bit more about how these various agile meetings operates, what is their goal, and what are their objectives or the outputs which they generate at the end of it. Now, please be clear, the PMP exam will use iteration and sprint as a replaceable word, synonyms. So sometimes they may use a word that which of the following are the output of sprint planning meeting, and they may use a word sprint goal, iteration goal as the same thing. Similarly, iteration plan, sprint backlog, or iteration backlog, these all words may also get used interchangeably. So be aware of these terminology, and then you understand how these things work. Now, if you are still confused that why not definition of done, why not estimated product backlog? So you can say the estimated product backlog is something which is, the product backlog is getting estimated in a backlog refinement meeting. It's a continuous process. It's not a one-time job. It's a regular thing because the product backlog items are emerging regularly. And definition of done is something which we are having kind of an agreement for completion. So before we get into a sprint planning meeting, we should have that agreement. There could be some plus minus happening during the sprint planning meeting. Occasionally, it's not expected to happen inside that. And the objective of sprint planning meeting is not to come up with a definition of done, rather come up with a plan according to a definition of done. That's the whole idea. So definition of done is technically an input to an iteration planning meeting rather than an output of an iteration planning meeting. So checking the videos of those Scrum, which we have in our content, might be useful in order to have very good understanding of such kind of questions, and these kind of meetings might be useful for your PMP exam.
Question 29.
Which of the following technique can an agile team use to ensure project activities comply with organizational and project policies, processes, and procedures? Okay, yeah. A, quality audit. B, frequent delivery. C, backlog refinement. D, iteration review. So you can read the question again. Which of the following technique can an agile team use to ensure project activities comply with organization and project policies, procedures, and processes? So in general, this question is asking, how do you ensure organizational level process compliances, procedural compliances in the agile project? Which technique an agile team probably used to get it? Now, incidentally, you have 4 options, and 3 of those options has some kind of agile words, frequent delivery. A frequent delivery helps us in seeing something going to the business soon. Indirectly, it helps us in knowing the issue early. We know what is happening, what is not happening, but not necessarily get into the adherence part of the processes, adherence part of the organization policies. Say you may have a policy to not to work overtime, for example, just as a process, or you may have and how do we ensure that if the frequent deliveries are happening, overtime was done or not done? So there could be a possibility of violation of that organization policy still doing a frequent delivery. Similarly, the backlog refinement, ideally, we should be considering all organization procedures, processes when we are doing backlog refinement. Sometimes the new item may get added because of organization policies and procedures, but directly the assurance of what is happening as a process compliance is not necessarily coming out of backlog refinement. Similarly, in the iteration review, which goes more or less same like B, you can see the deliverable, but you may not be able to see the background story of it. So what is left? The option A, which is the right option here. Now, sometime you may feel, oh, this seems to be a traditional thing, quality audit. I have worked in the agile world and we hardly hear this kind of term or word or something like this. So the idea here is, first, when you are dealing with a PMP exam, you can assume that there could be a mix-up of agile terminologies and project management terminologies. You need to get into the essence. In the agile world, you may do your compliance, process, adherence, reflection in a retrospective meeting. So this quality audit might happen in a retrospective meeting. In some cases, it might happen during the iteration as well when you are working on it. So it's a kind of work. It's not necessarily a meeting. You may not have a special meeting called quality audit. In some cases you can, but may not have it. You might be doing in the retrospective meeting alone, or you might be having some occasional special audit meetings also. But in general, the idea of ensuring that are we adhering to the organization processes, policies, is quality audit. And even in the agile world, especially when you are dealing with PMP, you should be aware that these things can show up in the agile projects as well.
Question 30.
A hybrid automobile project runs an agile software track and a predictive electronic track. 2 tracks. Okay, hybrid project management. Incidentally, delays accumulating halfway into the project due to misalignment between releases between the 2 tracks. Okay, yeah. What should the project manager do to improve this situation? Okay, so you have 1 track agile, another track predictive. They have their own release milestones or processes, and there is no alignment between it. And that is creating issues and overall delays. Sometimes this guy is waiting, the predictive guy is waiting, something adaptive guy is waiting. So this is happening here. So how should I do? How should I handle it as a project manager? Let's look at the options. Develop an integrated project schedule for both tracks. Yeah. Improve communication by revisiting the communication management plan. Okay. Conduct retrospective with an agile track to identify improvements. Assign team leaders for both the tracks to ensure alignment. So you have 2 managers taking care of the track and you are a super manager on top of it. Okay, so all 4 options. Which one you would like to take? Okay, so let's look at one by one. And I believe there is some value in all the 4 options, but they might lack something. And that's why we may need to pick something else. So one thing is developing an integrated project schedule for both the tracks. It might be a difficult thing because agile team might not have a clear understanding of what all deliverables will come over a period of time. That's why they are agile. Yeah. So they may not be able to predict. And even if they predict, they may not be able to achieve it. If they can predict it and achieve it, then they are no more agile. So it might be a very attractive thing to do for a project manager. Like project manager might be very happy to do it if it is possible. But in the agile world, it's not possible because I can't have a 1 project schedule because the agile track is not having that much predictability. So that's why it goes out. Now, improve communication by revisiting the communication management plan. Now, the overall idea here is there seems to be a collaboration and communication issue. So for me, that if you have a different release date, if you are unable to track what is happening, unable to see that because of some change request, a predictive thing might be delaying something, or the agile guys are delaying something. So there is an overall lack of communication, and which might need to be improved by introducing some joint planning meeting, joint review meetings, sharing of information, some information radiators, some dashboards. So I may need to revisit my whole communication process. And that seems to be a great idea. So I can say that for me, the option B is the one. Because it is saying we need to revisit our communication management plan. So don't think of that just creating a new document. It is just not about creating a document as a communication management plan, but it is about coming up with the right strategy for communicating. Now, conduct retrospective with an agile team to improve. Maybe a good idea, but the problem is just not limited to agile team. The problem is also in the predictive team. So just focusing and working with the agile team and doing lesson learns or retrospective meeting with them might not solve the problem. Yeah, so that goes out. The final option, assign team leaders for both the tracks to ensure alignment. Now, it might be at some extent needed, which can be covered in communication management plan, but I don't see that there is a need for centralized management. Yeah, there is no clear indication which is saying that centralized management will solve the problem. You may need to have some communication channel in which you may have some information getting exchanged by a particular person, but that seems to be a part of communication management plan if needed. And we don't have a clear idea to in the question to tell that we need 2 managers to handle and facilitate these particular alignments. Yeah. So, and talk to each other. Possibly they are needed. If they are needed, they can fairly include that particular whole process in the communication management plan itself. So out of B and D, I see the B is more agile, more systematic, more integrated. And that's why I pick up the option B, which is saying improve communication by revisiting the communication management plan. You can revisit in a multiple way. There could be many other options, but again, in the PMP exam, we need to pick up the option out of our available options.
Question 31.
Based on the velocity chart of the last 6 iterations, how many iterations do you estimate for finishing 100 story points of work? A little bit of calculation and some understanding of Agile is needed. Yeah. Okay, so I just read the options. It can't be calculated based on what data you see on the board. 3 to 4 iterations, 4 to 5, 5 to 6. It's all about once you calculate, you know the answer. So I pause for a while and then we look at what is possible here. Okay, so what is velocity and how it helps us in calculating the number of iterations in the release? So you can say that velocity represents the quantum of work a team can mark done in a given iteration. So can we read that from this particular bar chart? Now, what is presented here, you see different bars. You see an iteration in the bottom, and the bar has a number written, and the length of the bar is representing the velocity observed in a given iteration. So first thing is that we should be comfortable with reading such kind of graph. So I can see that, yeah, there were different velocities. Now you might say, oh, I know if I have 100 points of work done, I can divide by velocity and find out how many iterations probably this particular thing will need. But here you don't have a given velocity, you have a chart. So which particular I should use in order to calculate the number of iterations needed? Now, in general, we use something which is more recent. Now, if I see here trend, if I take the whole average, it may comes around 22, 23, something like that, if I sum total all. But is it relevant to refer something which was happening in the first or second iteration, where we can say that clearly from the recent 3 iteration, if I take that average, this is something, a trend which I can particularly focus on. So many times we use the recent numbers and take moving average out of that recent number to calculate, predict, or estimate rather than say, to estimate the future velocities. So here I should focus on the last 3 iterations more than the previous 3. Yeah, so I focus on 20, 25, 30. Now, if I take an average, it comes around 25. The pessimistic estimate could be 20 because out of last 3, the 20 was the slowest one and 30 was the fastest one. So if I go the fast speed, still I need 3+ iterations. I can't finish it in just 3. And if I go slow, I need 5 iterations because 100 divided by 20. And on average, also, I should take around 4 to 5 iterations. And that's why the option C wins here, because I can say that my pessimistic could be 20, my optimistic could be 30, and most likely I will be somewhere around 25. And looking at that, I can say 4 to 5 iterations are good enough. Yeah. So pessimistic will go towards the 5, optimistic probably could be 3.5 or something, but we better focus on the easy number, which is 4. So out of the available option, in such kind of question, the available option also matters. In this particular case, we had a range, so it was easy to select. In some cases, you may end up facing just a 1 number, but still you need to use your judgment, take the recent observation and focus more on relying on the recent data rather than the past data. And this is how I can calculate the number of iterations needed for the given amount of work. So simply 100 divided by velocity tells me the number of iterations. That's something I'm looking for. But the only thing is velocity I'm using from here. And that's why I'm saying, okay, if I go on average, it will be 25, then it's a 4. If I go little slow in a 20 speed, it could be 20, then it will be 5. then 4 to 5 is a good option to select given the data I see in the chart.
Question 32.
The table below represents the status of user stories at the end of iteration. Okay. What is the velocity of this iteration? You can see the story A looks like it was a story point size 8. Story had met all the acceptance criteria. There are open defects, and definition of done in case of story A is not complete. Okay. Story B, C, D having 3, 5, 3 as a size. We have complete definition of done completed. Yeah, that's something happened. Story E, we had size of 8, 50% of the acceptance criteria met. So I can assume if there were 4 acceptance criteria, 2 got met. DOD is not completed. Okay, so when you have such kind of situation at the end of iteration, what is your velocity? How do you calculate velocity for the given iteration? Yeah, options are just the number 19, 23, 11, 15, but I think the whole idea is about the calculation. So you can pause the video and calculate yourself so that we can check how do we align. Okay, yeah. So I can say one thing is pretty much simple, that these 3 will get marked when we are calculating velocity, because these 3 are simple case. Anyway, story B, C, D are completed, and we should be counting them in the velocity. The only question is about A and E. Yeah. Should we add some points from there? If yes, how many? That's the kind of confusion, and that's the concept this particular question is testing. Nothing other than that. So what I see here is story A seems to be well completed. Yeah, but it is not meeting definition of done, and that's the only information is provided to us. Whereas a story E is clearly shown that it's partially done, 50%, 60%, percent is percent, but it's not meeting the definition of done. Now you may be inclined towards considering story A as a part of velocity, or maybe considering some part of story E's point also as a part of your velocity, because both of them are big. They are 8 pointers. If you consider something, your velocity goes up. So please remember the rule. When you are calculating the velocity, it's only about done and not done. If I have other information which shows some type of splitting in the story A, and that part is done and that the other part is not done, I could have considered the done part only. So when I have a story, I don't have anything to do with the percentage completion. I don't have to do anything with one part is not done, second part is not done, or just something is left and it is nearly meeting definition of done. So please be aware, there is no nearly meeting definition of done. It's meeting or not meeting. So in this particular case, the calculations are simple. I just need to sum total B, C, and D, and the answer will be 11 only. There is nothing else. I just need to sum total the done part of my iteration work, which is story B, C, and D.
Question 33.
The release was planned in 4 iterations. What can be inferred from the burn down chart below after the 3rd iteration? So you have a burn down chart. You need to interpret what is possibly coming out without much of ambiguity from this particular graph. And you need to pick up the 2 statements out of 4, which can be fairly interpreted from this particular graph. Yeah. So statements are pretty easy. The release is behind schedule or the release is ahead of schedule. 100 story point of work is pending or 100 story point of work is done. So these are the 4 statements. You can pause and make your judgment. Okay, so see, the idea here is my recommendation. Whenever you have a graph kind of situation, be clear what information is available here. What is x-axis, what is y-axis, and what is represented by the lines. So in the burn down chart, remember that in the x-axis, what you have iterations. So I can clearly say these are the iterations, iteration 1, iteration 2, something like that. So you have an iterations. What you have in the y-axis, that is little tricky. You have remaining work in size. In case of here, I can assume it's a story point. Yeah, so that's something I can say. That makes me a burn down chart. So that's a burn down chart. We have y-axis remaining work in story point, and I have an x-axis talking about iteration. Now, what are these lines? So I can talk and interpret them as well. Yeah, not necessarily in the exam. You probably know them directly, but here we can probably interpret them as well. The blue line, which is coming here, is an expected line. That's why it is going till iteration 4. Means we are expected to burn in this particular way. Whereas the another color, the orange color line, is primarily focusing on the actual. So this is at the end of an iteration 3. This is where I stand. So this is my actual, this is my expected, which I had. Yeah, that's something I can say. Now, with this information in my hand, how do I see various options? So I can better put a blue line here, blue color here, rather than putting expected in the orange. So I can say this is an expected. Okay, so let's look at the option now once we have a fair understanding of the graph and its lines and parameters. The release is behind schedule, option A. Yeah, so that is pretty much clear. The release is behind schedule. Why? Because I have a more remaining work left than expected. So whenever in a burn down chart, your actual is above the trend line, above the expected line, it means you have a more number than anticipated. And what is this more number? It's a remaining work. So when you have a more remaining work than anticipated, then you are behind the schedule. Yeah. So simply I can say this is perfect. And when I say this is right, the another one is definitely wrong. Yeah, I can't be behind and ahead at the same time. Done. So this A and B is easy to figure out. Let's look at C and D. 100 story point of work is pending. 100 story points of work is done. Now, this particular question might be given to just give you a little bit confusion. So you can say that you started from 200 and right now you are at 100, which might make you feel, what does it mean? Have I finished 100 or do I have a pending of 100? Or does it mean both? Yeah. So the answer here is, it clearly means you have a pending of 100. That is perfectly clearly coming out. It may not necessarily mean that you have done 100 points of work. There is a possibility you might have done little more in case some work has been added in between and you might have done it. So from a burn down chart, it also depends how it is presented. It's better to focus on something which is clearly coming, which is the remaining work. We have no indication of the done amount of work. Definitely the remaining work is equals to the total work minus done work. But here in many burn down chart, the total work might have fluctuated in between, So it's better if I have to choose out of C and D, better I choose a clear thing which is coming out. The 100 story point work is pending. That's clearly coming here. It might be, it might not be, depends upon how the overall burn down charts are plotted. So for me, the answer will be A and C, because burn down chart always shows what is remaining. And I can clearly see the remaining is more than what is anticipated at this point in time.
Question 34.
The release was planned in 4 iterations. What can be inferred from the burn down chart below after the 3rd iteration? Select 2. Okay. So work was added in the 3rd iteration. The release is ahead of schedule. The team has a consistent velocity. The team was ahead of schedule in the 2nd iteration. I let you think, choose 2, then we talk about it. Okay, so here we are in a burn down chart and we understand what is the x-axis and what is the y-axis. The x-axis are iterations. We are talking about iteration 1, iteration 2, iteration 3. And the y-axis is the remaining work in the story points, yeah, or in the size, yeah, whatever the size is, in general story points. So, but it should be quantifying the remaining work. So I understand that information. pretty well. And this is something good to write it, that it's a remaining work. Yeah, because else I may get confused. Yeah. And I can also understand the blue line represent the expected trend, and the orange one is representing the actual. So this is my actual information which is coming. So this information I just want to tag so that I am clear. Now here options to me seems to be a little tricky, and it requires a little bit of more interpretation of these particular burn down charts. So let's go one by one. The work was added in the third iteration. Now what do you see? You see here that in the second iteration, you had less than 100 points of work left. Yeah. And at the end of a third iteration, you have a more work left because the line went up. So how is it possible that after finishing 2 iterations, when I finish the third iteration, I have a more work left than where I started? So it can only happen when my work got expanded during the iteration. Now, it could get expanded based on various possibilities. One possibility is that new scope got added. Another possibility could be I end up resizing my remaining work. That also kind of expanded. The third possibility could be that more defects got recognized, and that's what I can say, that this is more and more work for me. But in general, the work has been expanded. There could be various reasons for it, but work has been expanded. Yeah. So I can fairly say this seems to be the interpretation where I can say, okay, I put a question mark and see if anything else more concrete coming in. But there is a clarity that something has happened which has expanded the work, maybe more work or maybe re-evaluation of work. That's the possibility. Then I go to option 2. The release is ahead of schedule. Definitely this cannot be interpreted. I can't say this is ahead of schedule. I can clearly see it's a behind the schedule. So this is anyway out. Yeah, this is not true. You know, this is not true. I can't interpret that information from here. The team has a consistent velocity. I can't interpret that. I can't say no. I can't say yes. Again, I can't find out that information from here. One thing is very clear, that since the trend is zigzag, it's not consistent. Whatever is happening, or I can't find out from this particular chart, it is a consistent or not consistent. It might be, it might not be, but I cannot infer that from this particular chart. So these two are anyway out. The team was ahead of schedule in the second iteration. That seems to be clearly visible, because at the end of a second iteration, the remaining work was less than the anticipated work or the also expected work. So my line was below here. Yeah, you can see this point of actual was below in the second iteration. So I can clearly say that at the end of a second iteration, I was ahead, but at the end of a third iteration, I am far behind. So something is happening here, which is not very clear, but I can clearly say that yes, this information was true. So I can definitely say this information is true. Now I can say this information is also true based on what I have to select 2 options. There could be various reasons for expanding the work, but work has expanded. That much is clearly coming. So if I have to choose 2 with this particular graph in this particular question, I will go with A and D. I can't say that release is ahead of schedule. I can't say that based on this particular graph. I can't say that the team has a consistent velocity. Yeah.
Question 35.
The release was planned in 4 iterations. What can be inferred from the burn-up chart below after the third iteration? Okay. The release is behind schedule. 100 story points of work is done. The team size is reduced in the third iteration. The velocity of the second iteration was more than the first. Now the thing here is you need to select 3. So in a simple word, you just need to find out one statement which cannot be inferred from this particular chart. Yeah. So there are 3 true statements. There is a 1 false statement based on what you see on your screen. I pause, let you explore. You better pause the screen. Okay, so let's go to a diagnosis of this particular chart again. So what are these x-axis, y-axis, and two lines? So this much we need to find out before we can make any interpretation of this particular chart. So the burn-up chart here, again, we have iterations. So we know that this is an iteration 1 and iteration 2, and since it is meant for the release, I can say that this part is iteration. Yeah, so that's fairly I can make that point. And this part is now it's a burn up chart. So in a burn up chart, it's a work done. So work done in story points, that's something I can assume here because in some size. Yeah, so this is my work done. So this is my y-axis. Okay, so after understanding x-axis and y-axis, I need to understand what are these lines. So I can go and say that my the blue line in this particular case is showing my actual progress, burn up. So actual work done is shown by this particular line, whereas the orange line in this particular case is showing me the target. Yeah. So it is showing me where I should go, what is my overall goal. Ultimately, I need to reach at this level. Yeah, this is my the goal post which I have. Yeah, and again, this actual work done is also plotted in a story point because the y-axis is story point and the target goal is also in the story point. So I understand this particular burn up chart now. Now let's see what we have in the option. The release is behind schedule, clearly shown here. So what is remaining? In the burn up chart context, I need to calculate remaining by calculating the difference between these two. So this is my remaining work. So at the end of third iteration, my remaining work is 100, whereas it should be around 50 if I was thinking of doing it in a 4 iterations. Yeah. So this seems to be the thing which is clearly coming out, that I have a more work left. Yeah, then probably I anticipated because I was hoping I will go in 50 per iteration, though that information is not clearly coming out from the graph, but we can fairly say that, yeah, this is, I could say, let's put a question mark. There is a no clear statement, but very, very clear indicator is coming. I probably see the other option. 100 story point of work is done, clear cut, because I'm saying this axis is work done and I am at the end iteration 3. I can clearly say the 100 story point of work is done. So this is pretty much clear. The team size is reduced in the third iteration. I don't know. Yeah, this graph it does not talk about anything about team size. Yeah. Now, what I can see here is that there seems to be a decline in the velocity in the third iteration. Yeah, I can say that, but clearly focusing on team size for that, there could be more off, there could be some challenges, there could be some poor technical results, there could be something. Yeah, so it's very difficult to say that I have a team size reduced in the third iteration. So I probably will not go with this, and I only have to find one false option. So technically, as soon as I see option C, I am done. Yeah, I am done. I know what is the answer. Answer is A, B, and D. That's very, very clearly coming. The velocity of the second iteration was more than the first iteration. Yeah, somebody will say, but this is not clear. This is coming clear. The slope of the line. The slope of the line is steep between first to second. So I can say there was more points burned. Yeah, than here. If I just look at here, it was around 30 or 40, but here it was around 50 or 60. That's something I can see a very steep thing coming in, and which makes me clear that this information is pretty much right. So B and D are crystal clear, right? A, without much of like assumption, I can interpret it that things seems to be behind because we are 50% left with what we have to do, and we only left with 25% of the time, whereas the team size, which is coming in C option, is clearly not coming as a clear indicator from this particular graph. So if I have to choose the answer, I will go with A, B, and D, which means the option C is something which cannot be inferred from this particular burn up chart.
Question 36.
Below is the team's Kanban board on the 9th day of 10 days of iteration. So Scrum board, Kanban board, I would say iteration board because it's a 10th day of iteration. Yeah, so it's a iterative scheduling. What can be inferred? Okay, so don't get afraid of seeing the board and thinking, how do I interpret it? Just go one by one and try to see what visual information coming. And you just need to select two things which are more or less coming very clearly from this particular Kanban board. You are in the iteration and it's the 1 day left before the iteration gets over. Yeah. So I pause and let you find out your two options before I talk about my two options. Okay. So work is on track. Is difficult to infer. I can't say seeing this particular graph. Rather, if someone give me an option and saying, it can be inferred that work is not on track, that might have been the right option, but we'll stick to what is given to us. So difficult to say that. No story is done. Yeah, I can definitely say nothing is done because there is nothing in the done column. Yeah, that's pretty easy. I can pick up. Yeah, that's pretty easy looking at the four options available. Because if something is done, I should see it visually. That's the whole idea of visual indicator as a Kanban board. I should see something in the done column if something is done. If there's something is not done, it's not in the column. That's clear. Story B and C will get tested tomorrow. How do I know? Yeah, from this board, I can't. It might be the true, but difficult to say from this board. Probability of finishing story F is higher than others. It's clearly coming because the story F is already reached here. Probability, it may require some more information before I can really say, but the board is not showing any blocking or anything happening at a story F. If I have to make judgment between C and D, the D is more easy to interpret. I might, in a real world, I might want to check more details of what is really happening in the story F. Yeah, but if I have to make a judgment between C and D, I can definitely go with D. So I know work is not on track. That's clearly shown here. Is it on track? Might be, but from this board, I can't find out. There could be something more which might tell, because this board is clearly showing you just left with a 1 day, and out of 6 items which you picked up, nothing is complete. So how can I say the work is on track? It's very, very, very unlikely to be on track, and graph is not telling. Some other information might say that, okay, everything is just requiring 1 minute of job and we will get it done, but that's an extra information. I can't see it from the board. And story B and C will get tested tomorrow is also very difficult to say from the board. So with this Kanban board, this was very concrete answer. The only challenge we had is finding the second possible guess out of this board, and that's something we picked up as an option D. So option B and D are my option. Yeah, you may have your option and reasons for it, but these are the two options I would select if I face such kind of question in the exam.
Question 37.
Below is the team's Kanban board on the 7th day of 10 days of iterations. Okay, what advice would you give to the team? So it's like interpret the Kanban board and probably see the right things or things which team should be focusing on, since we are left with, I can say 3 days, if I include the 7th one also, yeah, or around 3 days in this particular iteration. Yeah, let's see what are the options. So start developing story A and D. Yeah, you are pretty much behind schedule, so why don't you get started? Find way to finish story F. Okay, find way to move story B, C, E to the rest faster. Okay, no advice as work is going good. And the good news is you just need to select one possible advice. If you have to just say one thing, yeah, advice is also one of the possibility. What possible thing you probably will give here? Think about it. Let's pause. Okay, so here are we. So what this board is telling? See, I am already halfway through and I should have some items in a done stage. So the agile way of working should not be that we wait for the last day to mark everything finished. So it always talk about incremental development, and inside the iteration also it talks about incremental development. So I can see the things are not happening in that way. And I probably, as a project manager, team leader, scrum master, probably need to give some advice. Yeah, that's the work is not going good. That particular thing is obviously coming out from the thing. Yeah, there might be some reasons, but just looking at the board, I can't say no advice. There should be some advice. Yeah. So I remove D out of it. Now, A, B, and C all seems to be something which is done about the work. Now, what we need to explore here is what is recommended in the agile way of working when things are happening in progress. So that's the concept which is getting tested here. One of the concept which is saying is, let's start, push everything so that at the end we will get things done. So that's a story A and D. You know, why let's make them into development. I better push it into the development. That's the one way of looking. The another way of looking is that I remove the block, the last leaf into the done first, so that others can automatically get pulled. So if I remove these things, and then things will start incrementally moving. So now that's the whole idea. So one option is saying push from here, another option is saying push from here, and the another option is saying push from test to done. These are the three options you have. So the option B is this one, option A is this one, and option C is this one. You know, you are saying like, let's take the development into the test so that ultimately things gets done. By default, what we are expected is finishing things faster. That's the whole idea. We want to do things incrementally and keep the work in progress to a minimum. So by default, I want, if I can do something and finish this, at least I have one item marked completed. Yeah. So that should be my first focus. So that's the one thing I should do. My second focus should be that if I can move some items which are already at a later stage towards finishing, and then finally I should focus on this area. So in the Kanban way of working, we walk the board from right to left. So from done column to a backlog column, rather than from a backlog column to a done column, because we want the finishing happening, which creates pull for the work which is not yet picked up. Yeah. So that's the concept which is getting tested here, and which is primarily focusing on incremental finishing of the work is a good thing to do. So what should we pick up? The option B, which is like find a way to finish the story F so that we have at least something get marked done. Keeping done column empty after 50% of the sprint is over, not a good idea. Yeah, that's something basically you can pick up while you are dealing with such kind of questions. You may see these questions in the form of text-based information also, not necessarily in the form of a board, but whichever way, the concept remains the same. It's just a matter of presenting the information to you in a different formats.
Question 38.
Below is the team's Kanban board. At the end of an iteration, what is the team's velocity? Calculating velocity based on what you see on the Kanban board. Yeah. So you may get questions on calculating velocity in a different format. Sometime in the text, it is mentioned, this is the case and what is the velocity. Sometime in the form of Kanban board, this is the case, what is the velocity? So I let you figure it out and then we talk. You can pause and think about this particular board. Okay, so what is easy to see? There are 6 stories, and you can see the story also has some size mentioned. You have a size number given, and then we need to interpret the velocity at the end of an iteration. And things are presented to you is that there are 3 stories which are done. Yeah, there is a one story which is near to the done stage, which means it is at a test stage. Yeah, it's a 2-pointer story. And then there is another story or a work which is halfway through, it's an under development. Now, the only thing which you might be wondering or which is getting tested here is how do you treat the item which is not yet completed? So these are the 2 items which are not yet completed. These 3 items are well completed. So it's easy to say that I will pick up these 4 items, which are well completed, and they will anyway go into the total size. What do I do with the story B and D? Do I need to take some credit for these 2 stories? The answer is no. So what is velocity? Only summing total the items which are getting marked done, their size. So I need to just pick up a size of these 4 stories, 5 plus 1 plus 3, 1 plus 2 plus 5, which makes me 13. And that's the answer, because ultimately the 13 points of work is the only work which got marked done. Other works are in progress. Now you may tend to take, I should take at least 1 point from the test, or I should take at least 50% from develop. Please don't get into those traps. It's simple. We should have small stories ideally, so you don't have these kind of issues. If such kind of issues are happening in your ongoing iterations, we should figure it out in the retrospective. How do we avoid it, rather than start finding some calculative means to show that we are doing good and not fixing the underlying problem. So simply saying, if I have this particular Kanban board at the end of an iteration, my velocity is 13. Summing total of story F, E, C, and A, 5, 1, 2, 5 makes the answer 13.
Question 39.
The team uses on-demand scheduling. Okay, so below is the team's Kanban board at the end of a week. What is the team's throughput for the week? So if you recall, there was predictive scheduling, there was iterative scheduling, and there was on-demand scheduling. These are the 3 things which we discussed when we were talking about project schedule management. And that's the key thing which is communicated with the PMI manual as well about the scheduling space. So here the question is about on-demand scheduling. Yeah. So what is the throughput? That's the basic question coming out based on this particular graph you see on your board. Think about it and choose your answer. You can pause it and see. Okay, so if you see here, what is throughput? It's just finding out how many items we have finished at the end of a duration. So you can say weekly throughput, daily throughput, or monthly throughput. So can I see from this board what has been done in this week? If I can find that from this board, done means completed in this particular week, that will be my throughput. Yeah, and the work will keep moving. That's how we can say. So at the end of a week, I should go at one place and pick up all the items and say, I'll count them and tell them this is the throughput, which means in this particular board, it is clearly coming done this week. I have a fairly well mentioned title. Usually you don't get that clear titles in the exam or a real word, but yeah, so you have a fairly given title, which is the last column, which is showing that this all has been done. So simply I should just count them and say, this is my throughput. My throughput is 5. Now, the only possible confusion you may have, I have some A type of item and I have some B type of item. So will I just count everything and just tell 5, or I need to have A way counting separate, B way counting separate, something like this? So see, in a throughput space, if it's a velocity, then the calculation will be a little complicated and your A way counting and B way counting start making sense. But when it is a throughput, it doesn't matter what is the characteristic of that particular item. It's just counting the number of items which are marked completed. Now, ideally, all of these items of more or less of a similar size, which means it should not happen one item takes 10 days and another item takes 1 day. So that much gap should not be there. It could be like, one takes 3, another takes 4, another takes 2. Yeah, there could be a small range. So it doesn't matter to focus on the detail of it was a 2-day work, was it a 3-day work. We just count, okay, how many items were completed in a given duration. So that's a throughput, and that's your answer, which is a 5. Now you may wonder, what is happening at the rest of the board? So rest of the board will continue. Rest of the board will continue. There are items at a test stage, develop stage, analyze stage, and they will keep moving. When I'm calculating the throughput, the rest of the board is not an area of interest for me. When I'm calculating throughput, rest of the board might show me what is the amount of work in between. Yeah, and it may have a different interpretation. Since the question is not asking about it, we are not going into those interpretation. A lot of information is exhibited by the rest of the board also. But for throughput, I just need to count the last column and say, okay, these are the 5 items which got marked done. And I can say, this is my throughput for this particular week.
Question 40.
A hybrid healthcare equipment project runs an agile software track and a productive electronic track. Okay. Halfway into the project, a new risk impacting both the tracks was identified in the electronic track. What should the project manager do next? Option A, attend the daily stand-up for the agile team and inform them about the risk. Okay. Recommend product owner to discuss the and plan risk response in the backlog refinement. Option C, call a special meeting with the complete agile team to discuss this risk. Option D, add this risk to the agenda of the upcoming retrospective meeting. I let you choose your option before I talk about my opinion about these 4 options. You can pause, think, and pick your choice. Okay, so if I look at this question, in my view, this one is tricky one because seems to be most of the options are kind of a possible candidate option. So our choice is that we need to make best judgment and identify which one is the most appropriate out of these many options. Attending the daily stand-up of the agile team and informing them about the risk is good idea. It is not that bad. Yeah, it's a good idea. It's a good idea, especially if the risk impacts the current iteration. Yeah. But if the impact is not on the current iteration, then like there is no action coming out of that particular conversation because yeah, you spoke about something, but probably we need to handle it somewhere else. So we flag this question and see option and then see like, let's see if we have a better option available. Option B, recommend product owner to discuss and plan risk response in the backlog refinement. It could be a backlog refinement meeting. It could be a backlog refinement activity. To me, this looks a good option. Yeah, let's see if we have better one. Option C, call a special meeting with a complete agile team to discuss this risk. Not necessarily a good option until unless we have an emergency, because when the team is working on the current iteration, we should let them work on the current iteration. If I see something in the description which talks about that this is going to impact their current iteration, then I might need to do this option as a C. But if I don't see that clue coming in, then I shouldn't be disturbing my agile team in the current iteration. Option D, add a risk to the agenda of upcoming retrospective meeting. So that seems to be not necessarily appropriate here because the retrospective meeting primarily focuses on probably that how we misidentifying that risk. If you want to do that, that's a good place to talk, like how can we improve our risk identification process. But you have an identified risk which need to be analyzed and you need to see how to respond differently. Talking about it and waiting for a retrospective meeting to happen, that doesn't seem to be a right choice. So I come back to A, B, and C only. D, I can fairly ignore. Now, in A, B, and C, the critical thing from my point of view is an identification of, is this risk is on current iteration or on the future iteration? If it is on the current iteration, A and C becomes better. But if it is about the future, the B seems to be more appropriate. Now, though there is no clear clue coming out of it for both, it is for current or it is for future, but in the absence of the clue, which is not talking about current, I will go with option B and I say, okay, that you have a risk. It might require some adjustment in the priority. It might require some adjustment in the other dependencies. And better we talk and discuss them in our backlog refinement meeting. Yeah. So my opinion, if the risk impacts the current iteration, you better handle it then and there, maybe after the daily scrum. But if risk is impacting the future course of action, then backlog refinement seems to be the most appropriate place to talk about it. So I go with option B. I can see this one is having very close choices.
Question 41.
Your project will help the organization launch a new product for a new market. Since it's a new product and new market, okay, and market, many requirements are based on assumptions. What will be the best way to validate assumptions? Okay, look at the option. Conduct a user interview. Do frequent demos to the stakeholder, option B. Option C, deliver a minimum viable product. Option D, give a presentation of assumptions to the stakeholders. Pick up your choice. I pause before I talk about my opinion. Okay, the way I see, looks like all four options are good options. And what we need to do is we need to find out what is the best way to validate assumptions in the context of agile way of working, in the context of when the new product is getting introduced in a new market space. Yeah. So best possible option we have to choose, and then we see what makes a good sense here. Conducting a user interview is a good idea. You have some assumptions, and I personally believe that's the starting point. Whenever you want to do something, you want to discuss with the stakeholders, understand their need and expectation, and then only you want to build something. So you can imagine something, but if you talk to the user, they can give you better perspective of it. So it's a good thing to do in order to find out the right requirement and validating some part of your assumptions. Do a frequent demos to the stakeholder. Again, a good option, because it helps you in showcasing what is working, what is not working, and they can tell you where are you going right, where are you going wrong. Now let's look at the possible weakness in this option. It is just saying demonstration to the stakeholders. Now, stakeholder includes internal as well as an external. We can assume it might include the new product market customer segment, a representative as well. And we are showing them and taking some possible feedback. If the stakeholders are really including the end users, then it seems to be a decent place to collect some feedback. Deliver a minimum viable product. Now, in my view, this is the best option. Yeah. Now, reason is when you are asking or you are showing, the individuals are giving feedback based on what they read based on your presentation or an interview. But when they are using something, they are experiencing something, you may also end up knowing many things which they may not explicitly telling you. You can observe their behavior and you can collect more insightful inputs. And that's the reason it is promoted to produce a first version of the product, which can help you in learning, not necessarily earning, but learning about your customer behavior. And that's the basic utility of MVP, to validate your assumption in a best possible way. Now, option D, giving a presentation, demonstration, option B is far better than D, because you are giving a real presentation of a product, whatever is working. So doing a frequent presentation seems to be better than option D, but option D can also, in some cases, can help. But here we have to choose the best one, and MVP is meant for validating your assumptions, sometimes called hypothesis, which helps you in identifying where are you doing right and where probably you need to change your direction or pivot your way of working or serving your clients. So option C from my side, deliver an minimum viable product.
Question 42.
Your team has planned an iteration and identified some risk in achieving iteration goals. What is the best way to track these risks? Okay, option A, make risks visible and review them in daily stand-ups. Add the risk in the risk register and assign a risk owner. No tracking of iteration level risks is needed, option C. And finally, the option D, conduct a weekly meeting to review risks. You can pause, think, pick your choices. Okay, now the context here is you have just concluded Like your team is just concluding the iteration planning meetings. What do we do in iteration planning meeting? We plan for upcoming iteration. So we have a portion of a product backlog, which is planned for coming iteration. Now, when you are planning this, you might see there are some technical, people, management related risk for this piece of work only, the iteration goal, which you have picked up. Things may go a little bit wrong, which can put you in trouble for your iteration objective, which has an impact on iteration objective. Now, what should you do about those risks? Now, what is recommended is that we should make these risks visible and we should keep talking about them on a day-to-day basis. It is not something which we can put into a document and probably refer later, because this is something for very short duration work. It is not something which might come after a month. It is something, these risks will occur, if they have to occur, in next 2 weeks or few days only. So we need to keep our eyes on them. Yeah. And if these risks are becoming reality, they will put your current iteration only in a trouble. So the best place to talk about these risks is daily stand-up. Maybe while you are concluding your daily stand-up, you need to review that, okay, is there any risk which can derail our plan? And if it is true, then we should plan differently for our upcoming 24 hours. Now, you can put them into your tracking board, risk board, whatever you are using. And there is a possibility that before you conclude the daily stand-up, you may review them. Let's look at other options. So you can read from my explanation, the option A to me looks the most appropriate here. Let's look at other options. Adding the risk in the risk register and assigning a risk owner. So first thing is, we are talking about adaptive life cycle. Now, we may have a hybrid situation where we maintain a risk register even in the adaptive life cycle. But a pure adaptive life cycle, until unless it is not hybrid, there is a high probability that we maintain our risk related work either inside the iteration or in the product backlog. We may not necessarily create a separate risk register and assign a risk owner, because we don't have any other container to do something else related to risk. It is either iteration backlog or a product backlog. So option B is not appropriate until unless the question clearly tells me it's a hybrid environment, because the question is using the language of iteration planning, iteration goal. So assigning and creating risk register doesn't make much sense here. No tracking of iteration level risk. Definitely you need to track, because they will derail. And that's why we want to track our iteration plan every 24 hours. The whole idea of doing daily stand-up is that reviewing how are we doing for our current iteration. And if we have some challenge, if something is not working out, let's figure it out how to deal with it. That's the whole idea of daily stand-up. Conducting a weekly review meeting to review the risks. We already have sufficient amount of meetings built in the system when we work in the agile way. Adding another meeting, possible, but for that you need to have a solid reasons. It's possible that by doing retrospective meeting and you have a trend and you realize that we need a separate risk meeting, you can do that, but it should be avoided till the time you have a real need of it. And again, looking at something on a weekly basis, if the iteration duration is 2 weeks, the question is not talking about iteration duration though. If we have a 2 weeks long iteration, reviewing iteration only, reviewing the risk only 2 times maximum will not produce the desired impact, because if things will go wrong, they can go wrong any point in time. So from my side, option A is the right option.
Question 43.
Your team is in the mid of 7th iteration and you observe a recurring trend of a particular type of defects. Okay, these defects are creating rework in the current iteration. What would you advise your team? Let's look at the option. The good thing about PMP exam is we need to pick up from the available 4 options or 5 options rather than give an absolute solution for any question, because giving an absolute solution could be a difficult thing. So we have a 7th iteration, we observe some recurring trend, and it is also creating defect in our current iteration. Option A, do a root cause analysis on these defects. Okay. Option B, start discussing defects in daily stand-up. Okay. Reserve some time in retrospective for doing root cause analysis. Option C, retrospective should discuss it. Option D, reserve some capacity for rework in the next iteration. Pick your choice, then I share my idea. Okay, so what I see here is we have a defects. We need to do something about it. And this is a recurring trend and it is creating rework. So we need to get rid of this trend. So we have a productivity or a better value of our time, we produce more. That seems to be the clear thing. Now, rather than start discussing them and start planning for those defects, it would be good that we can avoid the creation of the defect. So option B talks about, let's talk about the defect and do something about them probably in the each daily stand-up. Yeah, okay, but what are you going to do by talking about it? Possibly you will do something and you add an agenda of discussing defects in a daily stand-up. That can derail the whole process as well, because this is not necessarily to be an item which probably required a daily stand-up discussion, because there could be many defects which might be coming in. Yeah. The option D, reserving some capacity for rework in the next iteration or current iteration, is also seems to be that accepting that these defects will come and we should have some capacity built for it. Yeah. So D is talking about not solving the problem rather than letting it reoccur, but go a little plan so that it is observed in our planning. That's the option D. And option B is saying that, okay, let's track them well, which might be okay, might not be okay, depending upon what other options we have. Yeah. So we flag B and D and look at A and C. Now, the interesting thing about A and C is both of them are talking about doing root cause analysis. Yeah, the only difference between these two is the C is saying, let's do a root cause analysis during retrospective meeting. Let's continue the way we are going in the current iteration, record all these issues, and we will do an analysis in the retrospective meeting. That seems to be a good choice, probably. The option A is saying, since we have a lot of rework happening in the current iteration itself, why to wait for retrospective? Why can't we do a root cause analysis now itself and get rid of it so that we can deliver our iteration in a better way? Because you are in a mid, you're in the mid of the iteration. The 50% iteration is still pending. So what I go here is I go with option A. Yeah. The reason is, first, the question is clearly showing that you are in a mid of 7th iteration, which means you have a space. Delaying something for that long, which has a current impact, may not be a good idea. Yeah. So you should not be waiting for that long. You can wait if the impact is not on current iteration. You can say, we have a trend, we want to do something better, but let's finish the current iteration. Then probably it is okay. The hint this question is giving is the rework is getting generated in the current iteration. It is a trend, but it is also a trend in our current iteration. So my advice to the team would be, maybe at the end of a daily stand-up or during the daily stand-up when this issue gets raised, rather than making discussion about the defects every day, I would say, okay, why don't we allocate some time after the daily stand-up and do a root cause analysis on it and find out what should we do differently in the current iteration itself so that we don't have that much rework. So I would recommend or advise my team, out of all 4 options available, this seems to be better one to me, because I can say this is going to save my current iteration and we can have further analysis of it, like how it could be avoided and other thing in our retrospective meeting also. So we can discuss it later, but as of now, we need to focus on doing something about it, and I will pick up the option A here.
Question 44.
Your project uses an agile approach. Which of the following technique helps in delivering value incrementally? Phase and reviews. Option B, deliver increment at the end of every iteration. Option C, deliver frequent minimum viable products, MVPs. Option D, deliver value in minimum business increments, MBIs. I pause, let you pick up your option. Okay, so I hope you have picked up your choice. What I see here is it's more like a tool and technique kind of question where they just want to pick up that, okay, which term technique is more associated with incremental value delivery in the PMI lexicons or their terminologies. Now, phase and review seems to be the odd one out. So that seems to be very clearly out, that option A. Probably we need to focus on B, C, D only. Now, phase and review is a good review, but not necessarily it produce a delivery. So it might be a good place to do a feedback, but we are not getting delivery. Now, option B, deliver increment at the end of every iteration. Is it possible, not possible? We don't know from the question. So idea here is we should be delivering incremental value to the end customer as soon as we can. It could be end of every iteration. In some cases, it could be during the iteration also. In some cases, it could be after few iterations get accumulated, then only something starts making business sense. So the iteration finishing and value delivery not necessarily happens at the same time. It's not like that whatever we are finishing in the iteration, that thing is the one which is getting delivered to the end customers all the time. So we flag this and we'll say, okay, let's see if we don't have anything else, we may probably come back to the option B. Option C, deliver frequent minimum viable products. Now you may tend to pick this because you might have heard MVPs and we should do MVP. The idea here is MVP might be first or second release of your product because you are primarily doing for learning, not necessarily delivering of a value. And you don't tend to deliver MVPs all the time. You deliver it initially, primarily to capture the customer taste, customer behavior, and observe how the product is functioning. And then you learn from it and then you move forward. That's the whole idea. So you don't tend to plan multiple MVPs releases. There could be some exceptions where you end up doing 2-3 MVPs where first MVP is not giving you any conclusive information, then you may go for it. But in general, for generic understanding, we can fairly assume we may do first MVP and then we learn enough and then we move forward. Now, the final term, the option D, and talking about minimum business increment is the right option from my side. The idea here is the PMI has picked up this term from their discipline agile thing, where they are saying the increment, which is coming at the end of an iteration or during the iteration, if it meets the business requirement, then that increment should be called minimum business increment. So minimum business increment is an increment of a product which you are building incrementally. But whenever the increment which you have built is good enough for a business sense, then it's a minimum business increment. So we need to keep delivering minimum business increments to our end customer. And that's the term which they want to pick up. And I believe if you face a question like this, we should remember that, okay, for delivering incremental values, the PMI term is minimum business increment. Option D for this question.
Question 45.
One business user proposed to add a new item in the ongoing iteration. What is the best thing to do in this situation? Option A, take an opinion from the project team. Option B, ask the user to wait for the iteration to finish. Option C, replace a planned backlog item with the new one. Option D, submit this as a change request to the change control board. So I let you choose and then we discuss. Okay, so we need to choose out of 4 only. That's the whole idea. Now, if someone has a new item, what they should do? The idea of working in the iterative iteration way of working is that we are open for change, but on iteration boundaries. We should not be disturbing once we get started inside the iteration. So it's like this, that whatever product backlog item we have picked up for an iteration in our iteration planning meeting, we should stick to them and finish that iteration with that particular goal. That seems to be the recommendation. Now, in a real world, you may have some exceptions, but exceptions are exception. And the question should show that there is a real exception. But if there is no exception, that's the rule, that you don't disturb your ongoing iteration. Now, so let's look at option now. Take an opinion from the project team. Now, project team is already working in their iteration plan. What is the need of discussing this issue with them? Now, this issue might get discussed with them when you really want to implement it, if there is an emergency and there is something like that. But if you have a clear mechanics of handling things, you know when the new items comes, they should go into a product backlog. And in the next iteration, we can review them. If that's a priority, we probably work on them. Yeah. So once we have that structure in place, there is no need of disturbing and creating further confusion. So option A is not needed. Option B, ask the user to wait for iteration to finish, is a good option. Probably we can have a better one, which can say that ask the user to add this item into the product backlog and discuss in a backlog refinement meeting. That could have been better one if it is available, but this seems to be okay option. We can say, okay, let's the iteration finish and then we'll see if we want to take this particular item, provided the other priorities are also matching. So we flag this option B. If we don't have anything good, we will come back to it. Option C, replace a planned backlog item with a new one. You don't do that. So see, the idea here is, it is not like somebody will say, oh, you have picked up 3 items. I have another 4th item. I can take one item out and I can insert the another one. Can you handle it in a 2 weeks time or in a given iteration time? Now, again, 2 weeks is not written here, but by default, we can assume 2 weeks as a duration of an iteration. So these all switching can derail your complete iteration planning, because you might have worked on other items. And such kind of switching will also be a little counterproductive for the whole team. And if we keep doing these kind of a switching, we will have more recurring events like this, which will also like devalue the iteration planning meeting, which we are doing in the beginning of iteration. It will also give a negative feedback to our backlog refinement process. So if we have to handle these things in a well manner, we don't look for these kind of adjustment. Rather, we focus on, let's put it into a backlog. Let's discuss in a backlog refinement activity and figure it out. If it is an important thing, we better do it in the next iteration as an important thing. So option C is not a good idea when we are looking at this question. Submit this as a change request to a change control board doesn't seems to be also inappropriate, because in the agile world, we do expect lots of requirement related changes. And most of the cases, the requirement related changes will not go into a change control process. Rather, they will go into a backlog refinement process. So that's the appropriate place for the change to be get discussed. There could be a change management in the agile world as well. You can have some kind of changes which requires change control board intervention, and you can define it in your overall project management plan. But for requirements, you are not expected to go in a change control board. Backlog refinement is your change control board for that. Yeah, that's something how you can think of. So looking at the remaining, all the other available option, I think B is the one which probably can work. We can say the user to wait for the iteration to finish. The B is giving a hint, probably in the next iteration, we can pick it up. Yeah, but that's not necessarily always true, because it also depends upon what other items are coming in. But making the stakeholder user wait for the iteration seems to be the best option out of the available one. So we go with option B, ask the user to wait for the iteration to finish.
Question 46.
Your team's analysis of MVP released last month shows that 5 out of 7 hypotheses are invalid. Risky place, yeah? What do you advise to do next? Let's look at options. Option A, recommend backlog refinement with a new learning. Option B, recommend further analysis in retrospective. Option C, recommend to stop the project. Option D, stop the current iteration and do replanning. Okay, pick up the option which makes most sense to you out of available 4 options. Okay, so let's look at these options one by one. So what is happening here? We have created a minimum viable product. We put it into a customer environment in customer's hand. We were hoping the customer will behave in a particular way, use the product in a particular way. And if we set up those things, we can serve customers' need. But based on the observation and the usage pattern, we realize that hardly anyone is using in that particular way, the way we anticipated. And many of our possible target customer segments are not even looking at the product. So you had some assumptions, you were hoping this person will use it like this, and those kind of people are not getting attracted to this particular MVP. Now, this learning is a place where we need to change our direction. We are not necessarily continue the way we are working right now. It might result into stopping the project also. It might result into recreating our hypothesis with the new learnings, and then checking if the modified approach can work. That's a one possibility. Or we may change the whole direction of our product offering or a customer segment, which is also called pivot. So it's a turning point. We need to do something about it. Now, here we just have to pick up one option out of 4. So this is something not necessarily an item of retrospective meeting. So I can say that option B seems to be not appropriate here because it's a learning, but retrospectives are more associated with the learnings which are coming from the team's thing. In this learning process, we also need external stakeholders. Yeah, we might end up doing a special retrospective meeting for it, but the analysis has been already done. So that's something is already done. Now we need to act on it. Yeah. So there is an analysis which is already done. Further analysis may produce some refined thing, but better, the question is saying do something about it. So we better, as a project manager, I better advise something to act on. So I keep the option B aside. Stopping the project. Now, there is a possibility, but we are not seeing a very clear judgment coming in that this is something is a hopeless thing or you are investing into wrong place. So clear-cut indication for stopping the project is not coming. It could be the case where after doing something, you may end up stopping the project as well. So that's a possible thing. Now stop the current iteration and do the replanning. Possible. That's a possible. But what should you do before doing replanning? Say, I am running a current iteration. I can say, stop, we need to do new. Okay, you can do that. But what is that new? You need to have a new refined product backlog ready. So you probably focus on option A first before you can think of option D, like requirement backlog refinement with new learning. So your advice would be that, okay, guys, how does this whole learning or discovery changes our path for product development? And that is something which we are going to discuss in a backlog refinement. Backlog refinement may result into deletion of some features, insertions of some new feature, retargeting our customer base differently with the help of new set of features, or changing some of the foundational assumptions which we were using to write or think about previous requirement, so that we have a new way of looking at our customer. And so that change in that backlog might be a shrinking of the scope, might be an extension of the requirement, could be anything. So looking at the available option A seems to be the clear and safe option, that yes, we need to do something about it. Stopping the project seems to be too drastic. Waiting for a retrospective to think about it also seems to be little too much, because we have already done a first level of analysis. Better look into it, act on it. And how do we act? We act by reprioritizing or rediscovering our product backlog. So I go with option A, requirement backlog refinement with the new learning.
Question 47.
A stakeholder experienced in predictive methods asks where to find the escalation process in adaptive lifecycle projects. Okay, option A. The communication management plan of the project defines the escalation process. Option B, iteration review meeting takes care of escalation. You can come in the meeting and escalate whatever you want. Daily stand-up meeting takes care of escalation, option C. So B and C talking about meetings where people can come and escalate. Option D, the escalation process does not exist in the adaptive life cycle. I think this one is little easy to pick. I wait for you to pick your own choices. Okay, so the idea here is the thing which I am trying to stress based on this question is, even in the agile way of working, especially when you are working in a project context, because we are not talking about pure agile where project does not exist. We are talking about doing adaptive way of working in the project context. So whenever you have a project context, you have a stakeholder, you have a formal communication needs, you have a contract to take care, you have some set of stakeholder to communicate various information. So in a project context, things like communication management plan, things like stakeholder engagement plan, things like quality management plan, they remain valid even if you are working in the agile way of working. Now, it might be a very lightweight understanding. It might be a just one-page understanding, but there has to be an understanding of how do we communicate, how do we do things, how do we escalate, how do we do a governance. So there has to be a clarity of it. And in our predictive as well as adaptive lifecycle space, the escalation related thing is usually placed in a communication management plan. So the question which this is trying to reiterate, or I am trying to reiterate with the help of this question, is that please don't assume that things like communication management plan or a stakeholder engagement plans are not needed in the agile way of working. They are needed. Now, in many cases, the way you work in the agile takes care of your communications also. There are some predefined meetings which are prescribed as a way of handling your day-to-day communication, and that itself becomes a communication management plan. But in today's world, a lot of things are happening in a remote way. Even though with a pure agile way of working, we need to have a little bit more explicit understanding of various things like communication, escalation, stakeholder engagement, quality management. So these understandings are needed. Now let's go with the options. Option A seems to be a good one for me, and let's see other one. Option B, iteration review meeting takes care of an escalation. Not necessary. So it's like the iteration review meeting is primarily meant for reviewing and learning what we have developed based on our previous understanding and previous discoveries, and how with the help of this development, we can take more feedback, we can learn and identify how to move forward next iteration onward. So that's the whole objective. If there is something which requires compliance related escalation, if there is something, not necessarily you need to wait for iteration review and make it an agenda item, the iteration review. So not necessary. Option C, the daily stand-up meeting is primarily for your team. Yeah, your stakeholder coming to a daily stand-up and escalating something might create the confusion more than a value for a daily stand-up meeting. So you want to focus on figuring out in a daily stand-up, how are we doing in current iteration and what should we do differently so that we meet our objective. That's the whole idea of a daily stand-up meeting. So not a thing. The escalation process does not exist in the adaptive life cycle. That seems to be clear out, because when you are working in a project space, we need to take care of escalation as well. Yeah. So what is the option here? What is the right answer? From my understanding, from my view, the option A is the most appropriate answer for this particular question.
Question 48.
Which of the following is not part of product backlog refinement activity? Option A, prioritization of the backlog items. Option B, estimation of the backlog items. Option C, splitting of large backlog items. Option D, identification of implementation tasks. It's a not one. You need to choose the one which is not included in backlog refinement activity. You can pause, pick your choice. Okay, so I think this one is a little straightforward, relatively simple question, because you just need to pick up what is not included in a product backlog refinement. A product backlog refinement can be done with the help of meeting. You can organize some stakeholders participating and looking at the requirement, and the team also participating and putting a number for the estimation purpose, and finally doing the prioritization. It can be done other way, like you might, that the one person may collect these inputs individually, separately, and finally aggregate them and creates the refinement and prioritization of the product backlog. In general, doing this activity using a scheduled meeting is usually preferred, though many frameworks are not explicitly recommending that meeting, but usually preferred. Yeah, that's the background story of a backlog refinement. So what do? So you have a product backlog, which has various items. You can call the big item epic or a small item story. You can say it has a various product backlog items. So when you are reviewing it frequently, every week, you should not be doing it in the beginning of the project and hoping that this will remain good. And you should not be doing 3 months in advance. Even if you do 3 months in advance, still you need to relook at it just before we get started in the next iteration. So even if you do some forecasting, but every week or very frequently, you are expected to review it. So you recommend as a project manager, continuous reviewing of a backlog. And for simplicity, we can say, okay, every week we need to check our backlog, product backlog, and see what are those priorities, and if we need to do some adjustment into it. So that's a fair assumption one can make when you are dealing with a PMP exam. So yes, you prioritization of the backlog item included, estimation of a backlog items included, estimation using the story point or a high level estimates, which helps you in identifying the size of the item without identifying who is going to do it. So as of now, when you are doing backlog refinement meeting, you are not clear who and when is going to work on this particular item. So you need to do an estimation, which is at a size level. You do at a option B, splitting of a large backlog items into small, especially the one which are becoming a priority thing. You want to make sure that upcoming iteration, we have a small items, whatever is priority item should be small enough so that we can schedule and get started. So that's included. Identification of implementation tasks. So this is something relates to how do I get it done? And as I said before, we don't talk about when and who is going to work on it. So identification of an implementation task is not necessarily a backlog refinement activity. It should be done while you are doing iteration planning. So we can fairly say that option D is the right option because it is something which is not included. So because it's a not question, so the right seems to be wrong option, but yeah, that's the option which we are picking for this particular question.
Question 49.
Your team released the second MBI last week. Okay, so one MBI was before and last week you released the second minimum business increment, resulting in many unexpected enhancement requests. What is the best way to handle these requests? Okay, you release something, you never thought that these many enhancement requests will come in, and you start seeing they pouring in, and you need to do something about it. Add them into the product backlog. Option B, create a change request for these enhancements. Option C, stick to the current release plan because they were unexpected requests. Option D, include request in the current iteration and postpone other work. I pause and let you pick your choices. Okay, so what I see here is option A is clearly a safe option. You can definitely pick up. Yeah. Let's see what is the wrong with B, C, and D. Raising a change request, the agile way of working, product backlog refinement should take care, not necessarily needed. So because change request for enhancement does not make clear sense, so we keep the B out. Stick to the current release plan. The question is indicating that you have unexpected requests coming in, but in the agile way of working, we need to look at the new learning. We need to keep revisiting our plan. So sticking to our current release plan or whatever you were thinking for MBI 3 is not a good idea. You need to look into these enhancements. You may decide to not to work on them, but you need to look into them. Option D, include request in the current iteration. That also not coming very clearly that this is something you must do it now. We don't see that impact or a burning impact on the current releases. So if there is something which is saying that that product is becoming not usable, then you may need to do some exception handling. But here we don't see that kind of situation arising. So it's a simple question: add the new enhancements into the product backlog. Now, addition does not mean that you are going to work on them just after this iteration, or you might work on them based on priorities. You involve the appropriate stakeholders, there will be appropriate refinement will be done, and based on the priority and the refinement process, we will work on these enhancements. So for this question, we can safely pick up option A, add these enhancement requests into the product backlog.
Question 50.
Some stakeholders are unhappy about your team's priority in the current iteration. What is the best thing to do in such a situation? Okay, propose a replanning of the current iteration. Option B, explain the prioritization process and ask for feedback. Option C, assure stakeholders to include their priorities in the next iteration. Ask the stakeholders to raise a change request. Okay, pick your choice. I pause. Okay, so if I look at this particular question, the way I read the situation, or the way I wanted to communicate the situation was that you are running in a current iteration, and few individual comes and say and tells you, whatever you guys have picked up for this iteration seems to be not the right thing. You should be working on something else. And it's not very unusual, because in a project there are many stakeholders, and you need to take the best possible priority which is coming out of your backlog refinement process, and the team gets started based on that. And you may have a person who is facilitating and coordinating the whole prioritization process, sometimes called product owner, but you may have that mention of that role or may not, but ultimately it is coming based on some kind of work which has been done in a backlog refinement process. Now you have done it, and still people are unhappy about it. Some people are maybe not aware of it, and they are coming up. Now, in general, there is no clear need coming in which is saying that these stakeholders are the one who are right. They might have their opinion, which we want to understand, but not necessarily is the right option. So proposing the replanning of the current iteration and disturbing it doesn't seem to be the right thing to do. So option A, which is talking about that we need to do something about our current iteration, may not necessarily be the right option. So I just keep it aside and move forward. Explaining the prioritization process and ask for feedback, that seems to be a good option for me. You need to explain how the overall thing works, and you may need to review the prioritization process also. There is a possibility that current stakeholder group who is participating in the backlog refinement meeting is not representing the changing nature or the real set of stakeholders who are really needed in the backlog refinement process. So you might need to understand the stakeholder engagement plan, may need to see who are the stakeholders who needs to be engaged more, which might result into your product owner or your backlog refinement process becoming more consultative with those stakeholders. So that seems to be the thing which might require change in a stakeholder engagement as well as in a backlog refinement process. Now, option C, assure stakeholder include their priorities in the next iteration. You can't keep that an assurance. You can say that we have this process, we will discuss about this thing in that process, but we can't predict that, okay, don't worry about the current iteration, we will take care of your requirement in the next iteration. Then if in the real world, sometime it happens, but in that case, what we can think or conclude from that is that our backlog refinement is not happening properly. We don't have a right people, right process for backlog refinement, and that's why we are doing this patchwork. Not a good idea. Option C. Ask stakeholder to raise a change request. In the agile way of working, the current iteration gives you a hint of agile way of working, focusing on requirements are expected to emerge, reprioritize, raising a change request is not needed. Sometimes some of you may start thinking, oh, if you want something to change in a current iteration, probably I need a change request. For a requirement related things, we have a backlog refinement process and we don't need a change request for that work. We may need a change request for some other purposes, which we can identify as per our change management plan, but not for our backlog prioritization thing. So looking at whatever is available in this particular question, to me, the option B seems to be the good one. Explain, review, rework your prioritization process, your backlog refinement process seems to be the thing which we need to do in such situation. Yeah, that's what I pick from these 4 options.